On the morning of August 8th, 2024, deep in the Amazon rainforest, just a few miles from the town of Yurimaguas, a police truck slowly made its way down a muddy road toward a remote wooden compound, known locally as Centro dos Mundos. A sudden shout came from one of the cabins standing apart from the main structures. Seconds later, officers smashed the door open with the butt of a rifle. Inside, the dim cabin was a scene of chaos. Bowls overturned, glass shattered across the floor, and the remnants of a small fire still smoldering at the center of the room. The air was thick, with the metallic scent of blood and smoke. A nearly naked man, drenched head to toe in red stains, knelt motionless, staring straight ahead. His lips twitched, murmuring words no one could understand. Nearby lay the body of a woman. Her corpse bore multiple wounds, and signs of a violent struggle marked the room. Blood smeared the walls, the floor slick beneath the investigators' boots. This wasn't just a crime. There was a ritual involved. Outside, staff members and local residents gathered in small clusters, murmuring about the two foreign visitors who had been staying there for several weeks. Police photographed the scene, sealed the cabin, and ordered everyone back. The eerie stillness of the jungle stood in stark contrast to the horror inside. Later that day, investigators confirmed that the man was a Ukrainian national and the woman was Russian. They had come to Peru seeking spiritual healing. Centro dos Mundos was a sprawling wooden complex, roughly 40 minutes by car from Yurimaguas, hidden deep within the Loreto jungle. At first glance, it looked like a simple retreat. Several cabins, a communal dining area, a ceremonial hall, and an open fire circle. Officially, however, the center promoted itself as a spiritual sanctuary, offering soul cleansing through ancient Amazonian practices, primarily through the use of ayahuasca and other psychoactive plants. The center was founded by a local man named Jose Ordóñez Sanchez, who grew up in the nearby village of Teniente Cesar Lopez in the Alto Amazonas province. From a young age, Jose claimed he could heal animals, even his own mother. Through touch alone, he began participating in ayahuasca ceremonies at age 12 and later declared himself a shaman. His background in acting and directing, which many eyewitnesses mentioned, made his ceremonies particularly theatrical, filled with dramatic pauses, vivid gestures, and powerful emotional cues. The center's website described it as a place where the worlds of spirit and humanity meet, with ayahuasca unlocking inner transformation. Promotional materials promised freedom from trauma, restored energy, even recovery from addiction. Visitors were offered jungle lodging, daily ceremonies, private healing sessions with Maestro Jose, and full immersion in Amazonian life. For travelers from Europe, the United States, and Russia, the center seemed exotic, transformative, safe. But behind the spiritual facade was a disorderly system with no medical supervision and no official licensing. Former participants later reported that potent, hallucinogenic plants were freely distributed, often consumed without guidance or proper dosing. Red flags had surfaced long before the tragedy in August. Several former guests accused Jose of inappropriate physical contact during ceremonies and so-called special healing rituals. Local media reported allegations of predatory behavior and emotional manipulation, yet no authorities intervened. The center continued operating, with Jose insisting that everything was part of the cleansing process. Staff later revealed that many visitors remained under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances for weeks at a time. There was no medical intervention planned. Even after the tragic death of Russian tourists, the center wasn't immediately shut down. Instead, Journalists were allowed inside, and the property was presented as calm, welcoming. This raised serious doubts about the objectivity of the investigation and prompted a troubling question: why are places like this allowed to operate without oversight? Centro dos Mundos is only one of dozens of such spiritual retreats that have appeared along Amazonian river routes in recent years. They all promise enlightenment and contact with spirits, but rarely have professionals on site who can help if a ceremony spirals out of control. If the events in Yurimaguas resulted in a death, it is unsettling to imagine how many similar centers may be hiding dangers behind a facade of healing and light. As investigators reconstructed the chain of events, the victim's identity was officially released for the first time. Lyudmila Lazarenko, 44, a Russian national. After completing her studies, she married young, later moved with her family to Thailand. It was there, away from the noise of modern cities, that her spiritual path truly began. She eventually opened her own healing studio, where she led meditation sessions and workshops focused on reconnecting the mind and body. Her approach blended Eastern philosophies with shamanic traditions. On social media, she often wrote about gratitude, inner light, and the importance of living gently. She often wrote about trusting the universe and believing in the power of love. Friends described her as compassionate and deeply intuitive. She was the devoted mother of 2 daughters, whom she called her greatest source of love, inspiration. Despite a busy schedule, she often reminded her followers that preserving inner kindness was the most important practice of all. To the thousands who followed her online, Lyudmila appeared to embody harmony, balancing family, spirituality, and teaching. Over the years, her interest in shamanic rituals grew stronger. She spent 9 years studying meditation, participating in cleansing ceremonies, and guiding others through their own journeys toward emotional recovery. South America gradually became the center of her spiritual focus. She called the region the ancient heartbeat of the earth. In 2022, she traveled to Peru for the first time and met Jose Ordóñez, the founder of Centro dos Mundos. In a blog interview, she wrote that her first experience with Amazonian shamans changed something deep within her. The jungle, she said, felt alive, like a place where a person can finally hear themselves without the noise of civilization. From that moment on, Peru became sacred to her. Lyudmila returned multiple times, staying for weeks on each trip. According to her husband, the rainforest made her feel restored, grounded, and spiritually connected. Her family remained in Thailand, despite their understandable worries, supported her path. Her public image remained bright. Warm smile, open heart, captions filled with positivity. Her final Instagram post appeared in March 2024, shortly before her last trip to Peru. Under a photo at the airport, she wrote, "This trip will change my life. I feel I'm meant to be there." Months later, her words would take on a haunting significance. Lyudmila departed for her 3rd journey into the Amazon, eager to continue learning from local shamans. After recounting Lyudmila's story, investigators shifted their focus to the second person at the center of the tragedy, Ivan Kuzmin, whose actions on the day of the killing suggested a sudden psychological break. To understand what unfolded in August 2024, experts began examining his past. Ivan was born in Ukraine and dedicated much of his youth to sports, particularly martial arts. His pursuit of strength and discipline shaped his identity. Later, he moved to Russia, began teaching capoeira, a Brazilian martial art that combines acrobatics, dance, philosophy. His students remembered him as energetic and charismatic, though they also noted his volatility, an intensity that could shift from passion to aggression with little warning. Over time, Ivan's dedication to physical training shifted into a pursuit of spiritual exploration. He became increasingly drawn to meditation, energy-based practices, and breathwork. During this period, those close to him began noticing troubling changes. His struggle with addiction surfaced, and he started withdrawing from others for weeks at a time before reappearing with a completely different social circle. His sister later recalled that he spoke frequently about visions, divine messages, and a personal mission to cleanse people of negative energy. In June 2022, Ivan traveled to Peru for the first time to join a program at the Centro dos Mundos retreat. He enrolled as a participant in a spiritual cleansing course. At first, he followed the rules, attended the ceremonies, and behaved calmly. But before long, his behavior shifted. Witnesses said Ivan began demanding increasingly large doses of ayahuasca, insisting that he could see more than other participants. The staff eventually restricted his participation due to safety concerns. After several weeks, Ivan left the center without causing any disturbance. 2 years later, however, he returned, this time not as a humble participant, but as someone who saw himself as an experienced practitioner of Amazonian rituals. By then, his dependence on hallucinogens had become unmistakable. He was reportedly consuming ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms regularly, sometimes mixing them with other psychoactive plants. People who encountered him in the summer of 2024 described a man in constant emotional turmoil, fluctuating between euphoria and despair. Speaking obsessively about spiritual purity and a higher mission he believed he had been assigned. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Ivan began making increasingly intense comments about Ludmila Lazarenko, calling her pure energy and the light meant to save him. He claimed they were spiritually bound from a past life and that he owed her a sacred karmic debt. Most dismissed this as mystical rambling, but Ivan believed it wholeheartedly. His sister later told reporters that Ivan was not a violent person, but someone who had lost his grip on reality. She described a lifelong struggle against inner chaos, a battle between faith and fear. She said he had experienced drastic mood swings and multiple episodes of emotional collapse long before setting foot in Peru. By August 2024, Ivan's mental state had deteriorated severely. Prolonged use of hallucinogens, combined with isolation and the absence of medical supervision, left him psychologically vulnerable. He interpreted hallucinations as divine messages. He believed he had become a messenger between worlds. At that point, he was no longer able to distinguish vision from reality. What began as a search for spiritual growth had transformed into a dangerous descent into delusion. To understand what happened that night, investigators had to examine the substances used in the rituals. The central one was ayahuasca, a traditional Amazonian brew made from the Banisteriopsis caapi vine and the leaves of Psychotria viridis. Indigenous shamans use it to enter altered states of consciousness, but medically, it is a potent hallucinogen capable of triggering severe psychological breaks. Addiction specialist explains that ayahuasca contains several psychoactive compounds, the strongest being dimethyltryptamine. It interacts with serotonin receptors in the brain, dramatically altering perception. A person may begin to see, hear, and feel things that have no connection to reality. You can start hearing smells or seeing time. Dimethyltryptamine alone wears off quickly, but when combined with the vine that inhibits liver enzymes, the hallucinogenic effects can last up to 6 hours. During that period, users can experience panic attacks, violent impulsivity, severe dissociation, memory gaps, and temporary personality disruption. For someone mentally stable, it can be destabilizing. For someone already psychologically fragile, it can be catastrophic. The risk increases exponentially when ayahuasca is taken alongside other psychoactive plants. At Centro dos Mundos, it was common for participants to also use psilocybin mushrooms and San Pedro cactus, which contains mescaline. All three substances overload the same neurotransmitter system, flooding the brain with serotonin. This can lead to a dangerous condition known as serotonin syndrome, characterized by seizures, respiratory difficulties, extreme agitation, and complete detachment from reality. The combination of these substances often leads to a collapse of consciousness. When a person loses their sense of identity under such conditions, it is common for intense religious or mystical delusions to appear, visions of spirits entering the body, voices whispering commands, or a sudden conviction of being possessed by dark forces. In a confined space with no medical supervision, these episodes can escalate into extreme aggression in a matter of minutes. Neurologists emphasizes that ayahuasca is not medicine, nor a safe path to self-discovery. It is a substance that tears down the brain's natural filters. For someone with latent psychological vulnerabilities, it can become the spark that unleashes irreversible psychosis. For Ivan Kuzmin, that ritual became exactly that, a breaking point. Already struggling with dependency, he kept increasing his doses, mixing ayahuasca with mushrooms and San Pedro cactus. The result was a complete mental overload. His hallucinations hardened into a battle he believed was unfolding between light and darkness inside his own mind. Experts agree that tragedies like this could be prevented with professional oversight, medical supervision, psychological screening, and strict dosage controls. But in informal healing centers, all boundaries disappear. What is marketed as a spiritual journey often becomes an unregulated experiment on the human mind. And for someone already standing at the edge, this mixture can push them past the point of no return. Ivan and Ludmila's paths first crossed in 2023 at the same Centro dos Mundos, where the tragedy would later unfold. She was there as a student, and he as a participant. They connected almost immediately. She sensed that he was struggling emotionally. While he saw her as a guide, Ludmila helped him recover from the emotional crashes that followed the ceremonies. Ivan convinced they had known each other in a past life. After they left the center, they stayed in contact online. In June 2024, both returned to Peru, arriving just one day apart, Ivan on the 21st and Ludmila on the 22nd. Staff members later said the two were inseparable, sharing rituals, meals, long meditations in the jungle. According to José Ordóñez, there was no visible conflict between them. They seemed genuinely content. In early August, they traveled to Laguna El Source, near the Tarapoto region, a place known among spiritual travelers as an energetic sanctuary. Witnesses recalled them as calm, joyful, laughing often, and taking photos together. When they returned to the center, they chose to stay in a private hut, saying they wanted space to deepen their spiritual work. But it was during this time that Ivan's behavior began to worry those around him. He asked for higher doses of ayahuasca and spoke increasingly about his mission to protect Ludmila from darkness. Others dismissed this as symbolic language commonly heard during ceremonies, but beneath the surface, tension was growing. In her journal, Ludmila noted that something in the atmosphere had shifted. Still, she continued the rituals, hoping the imbalance would pass. Just days later, the bond they believed was spiritual would spiral into a fatal delusion. August 8, 2024. The humid tropical night over Yurimaguas was heavy. Still, away from the main buildings of Centro dos Mundos, stood a small hut made of wooden planks and palm leaves. Inside were Lyudmila Lazarenko and Ivan Kuzmin. It would be the last night either of them spent together. According to investigators, the two decided to perform a private ceremony that evening inside the hut. Authorities later discovered remnants of ayahuasca, powdered psilocybin mushrooms, and traces of San Pedro cactus, the three most potent, natural psychedelics capable of inducing intense hallucinations. The combination is extremely dangerous even for experienced practitioners. For Ivan, already psychologically unstable, it acted as a catalyst. At first, the atmosphere was calm. They sat across from each other just as they had during previous sessions. Lyudmila, witnesses said, knew how to guide rituals. She played music, humid chants, and used gentle breathwork. But soon, Ivan's behavior shifted. His breathing became irregular, his movements sharp and restless. He claimed he could sense another presence inside the hut, insisting that someone unseen had entered the room. Later, during questioning, Ivan claimed that at some point during the ceremony, Lyudmila began to change. In his altered state, her face no longer looked human, and her eyes appeared completely black. He insisted he saw a dark spirit enter her body. According to investigators, that moment marked the onset of a severe psychotic break. Ivan reportedly leapt to his feet and started shouting about demons and purification. Lyudmila tried desperately to calm him, but by then, Ivan seemed unable to understand her words. Investigators concluded that he grabbed a nearby object, possibly a metal cup or glass bottle, and struck her with it. Around this time, guests elsewhere on the property reported hearing loud screams coming from the hut. One visitor, staying about 300 yards away later, said he heard a woman shouting in English, "Help me." Another guest sent a message to a staff member saying he thinks something happened to the Russian woman. Staff members ran toward the hut, but the door was locked from the inside. They tried to force it open but couldn't. All they could hear were frantic thuds, crashes, and the unmistakable sounds of a violent struggle. Someone rushed to find the center's founder, Jose Ordóñez. By the time he arrived, the noises had stopped. Jose later told police he looked through a small window and saw a horrifying scene. Ivan, covered in blood, standing over Lyudmila with a knife in his hand. He appeared to be mumbling and gesturing at things that weren't there, as if reacting to invisible entities. When police arrived shortly after the emergency call, they found the interior of the hut in shambles. Furniture overturned, objects scattered across the floor, streaks of blood on the walls. Ivan, half-dressed and visibly disoriented, stood in the center of the room. He didn't resist arrest, but seemed entirely detached from reality. At the moment, officers restrained him. He reportedly said only one sentence: "I took down a demon." Experts would later determine that he had experienced a full psychotic episode triggered by a combination of powerful hallucinogens. To everyone present, what unfolded felt sudden, chaotic, and surreal. Within hours, Centro dos Mundos was surrounded by police, and footage of the arrest had already made it onto Peruvian television. Cameras showed a dazed, blood-covered man being escorted out by officers. When a reporter asked who the victim was, one investigator responded quietly, "She came searching for light." She found death in eyewitness video taken at the scene. Ivan can be seen alternating between laughter and shouts of, "She was possessed. I was saving her soul." When officers finally broke through the hut door, Ivan was still standing in the middle of the room, unresponsive to commands. He suddenly screamed, then burst into laughter. As officers attempted to handcuff him, he lunged forward and tried to bite one of them. They were only able to restrain him with help from staff members and nearby residents. The footage aired soon after, showing a man who seemed completely unaware of his surroundings or actions. Inside, police recovered a knife, a metal pipe, remnants of ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, San Pedro cactus. Medical examiners confirmed Ivan exhibited signs of acute psychosis, profound disorientation, delusional speech, and extreme agitation. They concluded he had been under the influence of powerful psychoactive substances during the attack. Jose Ordóñez, told investigators that the center itself bore no responsibility, insisting, "We didn't give them anything. They took it on their own." His statement sparked outrage among locals. Crowds gathered outside the gates of Centro dos Mundos, demanding its closure. Many believed the tragedy had been inevitable. Too many rituals had been conducted without medical supervision or proper safety protocols. What was marketed as a place of healing had now become the site of one of the most disturbing cases in the region's recent history. After Ivan's arrest, local police in Yurimaguas transferred the case to the regional prosecutor's office in San Martin. The investigation moved quickly. The severity of the crime was undeniable. On August 12, 2024, just 5 days after the incident, the court held a preliminary hearing to determine custody conditions. Ivan was officially charged with committing a deliberate act of extreme violence, resulting in death. During the hearing, Ivan appeared confused and disoriented. He admitted causing Ludmila's death, but insisted he had been expelling a dark spirit from her. His defense argued he had suffered a hallucinogen-induced psychotic episode. After reviewing psychiatric evaluations, the judge ordered that Ivan remain in pre-trial detention for 9 months while awaiting the final verdict. Not long afterward, new and troubling details began to emerge. Reports revealed that Ivan had been receiving supplies, food, cigarettes, and other personal items from individuals associated with the center. This revelation ignited yet another wave of public outrage. Despite this, Jose Ordóñez continued to distance himself from any responsibility, insisting that the tragedy had nothing to do with the center's operations. But journalists soon uncovered testimonies from former participants accusing him of misconduct, manipulation, and negligence. Once those stories aired, local residents renewed their demands for Centro dos Mundos to be shut down entirely. Many began referring to it not as a place of healing, but as a place of death. Ludmila Lazarenko's body was cremated in the city of Tarapoto on August 14, 2024. The ceremony was attended by a close friend from Spain and representatives from the prosecutor's office. Her ashes were later transported to Moscow with assistance from the Russian diplomatic mission. The Lazarenko family demanded justice, filing an official request with Peruvian authorities. To them, the entire tragedy was incomprehensible. A woman who had devoted her life to guiding and healing others was gone, taken by someone she had tried to help. The story quickly spread across international media. Around the world, people began discussing the dangers of unregulated spiritual centers and the uncontrolled use of ayahuasca in Peru. This case became a stark warning, a tragic reminder of how thin the line can be between a quest for spiritual awakening and a plunge into perilous, unmonitored experimentation. It was March the 25th, 2022 in Mayfield, a quiet suburb of Newcastle, Australia. 21-year-old Mackenzie Anderson, known as Max to her friends, was at home in her modest apartment on Crebbett Street. She was a young mother, her life revolving around her 23-month-old son. Around 10:40 p.m., a frantic call reached the local police. A neighbor, startled by screams, reported a disturbance at Mackenzie's apartment. The police rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the Mayfield Street apartment, they found a horrific scene. Mackenzie was born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, in a close-knit family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackret, a dental hygienist, was a pillar of support. Their bond was evident in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha later shared. Mackenzie was also close to her stepfather and friends, who described her as the heart of their circle. She had a knack for making people laugh, often sharing snippets of her life on social media, where her TikTok videos captured her humor and strength as a young mother. Her son was her world, and she poured her energy into creating a stable life for him despite the hardships she faced. Mackenzie's life hadn't been easy. By her early 20s, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood while living in a modest unit on Crebit Street. Friends said she was determined to break free from a cycle of hardship, working to provide for her son and dreaming of a brighter future. Her relationship with Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, cast a long shadow over her life. The two began dating in late 2019, and their off-again relationship was marked by turbulence. By October 2021, Thompson had been jailed for assaulting Mackenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. An apprehended violence order was in place, meant to keep Thompson away from Mackenzie, prohibiting any contact or visits to her home. He served a short sentence with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. Mackenzie's friends later revealed Mackenzie lived in constant fear, convinced Thompson would come after her once he was free. Then, she messaged a friend, saying that Tyrone had just gotten out of jail and was still being weird, harassing her. Despite the AVO, Thompson reached out to Mackenzie almost immediately after his release, calling her and sending messages from multiple social media accounts. One heartbreaking detail emerged later. Mackenzie had ordered for a new set of knives for Christmas 2021, a practical gift for her home. Those same knives would later become part of the tragedy. The night of March 25, 2022, started like any other in the quiet suburb of Mayfield. But beneath the surface of this ordinary night, a tragedy was unfolding. Mackenzie's apartment on Mayfield was a small, unassuming unit in a block of flats, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by sight, even by name. That evening, she wasn't alone. A male friend, whose identity was closely guarded in early reports, was with her, along with her 23-month-old son, who was likely asleep in his crib. Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, was also present at some point during the night, despite the apprehended violence order that barred him from contacting her or visiting her home. The details of how Thompson ended up at her apartment remain murky, but court records later revealed that he had been asked to leave multiple times that evening. His refusal to comply set the stage for what would become a devastating confrontation. In panic, a neighbor dialed emergency services, describing a scene that sounded dire. A woman's voice in distress, a man's voice shouting, and the unmistakable sense that something was terribly wrong. The urgency was clear enough to prompt an immediate response from the Newcastle City Police District. When police arrived at the apartment block, they were met with a harrowing sight. Mackenzie lay lifeless on the veranda outside her unit, her body surrounded by blood. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics soon joining the officers in a frantic attempt to save her. Despite their best efforts, Mackenzie was pronounced dead at the scene. Her injuries were too severe to overcome. Her toddler son, found inside the apartment, was mercifully unharmed. Police found a man at the scene, later identified as Tyrone Thompson, sitting cross-legged at the top of the communal stairs, his hand bloodied and injured. He was loud and demanding medical attention for his wound. A broken knife handle and blade were found near Mackenzie, stark evidence of the brutality that had unfolded. Thompson was arrested and taken to hospital under police guard for treatment of his injury. The tragedy was the culmination of events that had been building for weeks. After his release from prison on March 9, 2022, Thompson immediately breached the apprehended violence order. He began contacting Mackenzie, calling her, messaging her from multiple social media accounts, and even reaching out to people close to her new partner. Court documents later revealed that Mackenzie had spent much of the previous 6 days with Thompson. Despite her fear of him, friends said she felt trapped, unsure how to break free from his persistent attempts to reconnect. That night, Thompson and a male friend were among those gathered at her apartment. Though the exact dynamics remain unclear, tensions escalated. The male friend, who had left earlier in the evening, returned to check on her, only to witness a horrific scene. Thompson standing over Mackenzie, who was already on the ground. Investigators later learned that Mackenzie had been trying to protect herself in the days leading up to that night. She had reached out to domestic violence advocacy groups, emailing them to request help with security measures like cameras and reinforced doors. The night of March 25th wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of a pattern of control and intimidation. Yet, the system allowed him back into her life just 16 days before her death. The AVO, meant to be her shield, was little more than a piece of paper. The Newcastle City Police District launched a meticulous investigation to uncover what had happened in those chaotic final moments. The investigation began at the crime scene itself. Detectives meticulously combed through Mackenzie's apartment, cataloging every detail. The veranda where her body was found was a focal point, marked by bloodstains and the shattered remnants of a knife. Forensic teams collected the fragments, knowing they could hold critical clues about the weapon and its wielder. Inside the apartment, officers found signs of a disturbance: overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and traces of blood that hinted at a confrontation that had moved from inside to the veranda. Digital evidence also became a cornerstone of the investigation. Mackenzie's phone and social media accounts revealed a trail of fear and desperation. Investigators found messages between Mackenzie and Thompson, showing they had been in contact since his release. Some exchanges were tense, others oddly amicable, suggesting a complex dynamic. Thompson had also messaged people close to Mackenzie's new partner, attempting to gather information or assert control. These communications, pulled from servers and cross-referenced with phone records, showed he had breached the AVO multiple times. Detectives also explored Mackenzie's broader relationships. They interviewed her mother, Tabitha, who shared her daughter's fears about Thompson. In a statement to the court, later reported by the Newcastle Herald, Tabitha said, "Mackenzie lived in constant fear after Thompson's release." Mackenzie told Tabitha he wouldn't let her go. Friends echoed this, describing how Mackenzie had confided in them about Thompson's persistent attempts to reconnect. One friend told police she wanted to protect her son but felt trapped, like there was no way out. During police questioning, Thompson's statements were guarded but revealing. According to court reports, later cited by the Newcastle Herald, he claimed the incident was a chaotic misunderstanding. He admitted to being at Mackenzie's apartment that night despite the AVO but insisted he had been invited. He described an argument that escalated, alleging that Mackenzie had been the aggressor, wielding a knife in a heated moment. His account painted a picture of self-defense, claiming his hand injury came from trying to disarm her. Though his story shifted under scrutiny, with inconsistencies about the sequence of events, he denied any intent to harm her. However, his explanation struggled to align with the physical evidence. The broken knife, Mackenzie's fatal injuries, and witness accounts of her desperation to escape. Detectives pressed Thompson about his actions in the days leading up to the incident, confronting him with evidence of his repeated AVO breaches, including messages and calls to Mackenzie and her associate. Thompson downplayed these breaches, claiming he was trying to sort things out and maintain a connection for the sake of their shared history. As Thompson remained in custody, the investigation continued to solidify the case. Forensic reports confirmed Mackenzie's blood on the knife and Thompson's DNA on the handle, strengthening the link to the crime. The autopsy of Mackenzie Anderson revealed she suffered 78 stab wounds inflicted in less than 3 minutes. On March 27, 2022, Thompson was formally charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and related offenses stemming from the events of that night. The murder charge was anchored by compelling evidence: knife fragments bearing Mackenzie's blood, witness accounts of her screams, and Thompson's presence at the scene with a suspicious injury. Additional charges included intimidating behavior, reflecting his pattern of harassment in the weeks prior. The motive, while not explicitly stated by Thompson, emerged through the investigation's findings. Detectives and domestic violence experts consulted concluded Thompson's actions stemmed from a need to regain control of Mackenzie, who was trying to move on with her life and protect her son. The presence of Mackenzie's male friend that night may have been a catalyst, intensifying Thompson's fixation. The charges against Thompson were a step toward justice. They also highlighted the failures that allowed him to remain a threat. By early 2025, the case had reached a critical juncture in the Newcastle Supreme Court, where the pursuit of justice for the 21-year-old mother unfolded. Initially set for a 4-week trial starting April 7, 2025, the case took a dramatic turn when Tyrone Thompson, then 25, changed his plea on April 1, 2025, in the New South Wales Supreme Court. He pleaded guilty to the domestic violence murder of Mackenzie Anderson, halting the need for a full trial. This plea came after years of denials, during which he had maintained his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. The guilty plea was a significant moment, sparing Mackenzie's family the pain of a protracted trial, but shifting the focus to the sentencing hearing, where the court would determine the consequences of his actions. The hearing, presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein, became a pivotal moment for all involved. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queenan, presented a harrowing case. They argued that Thompson's actions on March 25, 2022, were a brutal culmination of a pattern of control and violence. Court documents detailed how Thompson, on parole for prior domestic violence offenses against Mackenzie, ignored an apprehended violence order and broke into her Mayfield apartment twice that night. Using 2 kitchen knives, he stabbed her 78 times in less than 3 minutes, an attack so ferocious that one knife snapped. The prosecution emphasized Mackenzie's vulnerability, noting her repeated attempts to seek safety through advocacy groups and her fear that Thompson would harm her after his release. The defense, representing Thompson, acknowledged the gravity of his actions, but sought leniency by highlighting mitigating factors. They argued that Thompson's mental health issues and challenging background diminished his moral culpability. His legal team submitted that he was not psychotic at the time of the crime, but struggled with emotional instability, which contributed to the escalation. Then, an apology letter from Thompson was tendered, in which he expressed regret, stating, "No words can undo the pain and devastation he caused to someone he genuinely loved." However, the prosecution challenged this, with Queenan noting there is some element of victim blaming. Justice Weinstein, wary of the letter's sincerity, remarked that it offered limited insight into true remorse. On May 1, 2025, Justice Weinstein delivered the sentence. Thompson was jailed for a maximum of 22 years 6 months, with a non-parole period of 15 years 6 months, making him eligible for parole in 2038. The judge described the attack as a frenzied act of such ferocity that it left Mackenzie's family shattered. Noting their helplessness, despair, and anger, he acknowledged the aggravating factors, including Thompson's prior violence and Mackenzie's fear, but also considered his guilty plea and personal circumstances when setting the term. The sentence sparked immediate outrage from Mackenzie's family, particularly her mother, Tabitha Ackett. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, she collapsed in tears, telling reporters that whilst it might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts, they were disgusted that that sentence was what they thought the value of her daughter's life was worth. She called the sentence an insult to women globally and demanded an appeal. On May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions announced it would appeal Thompson's sentence, arguing that it was manifestly inadequate given the severity of the crime. Tabitha welcomed the decision, stating, "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards." The appeal, set for a 2-hour hearing in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 8, 2025, aims to increase Thompson's jail time. Prosecutors are citing the need to set a stronger precedent against domestic violence offenders. The case's current status leaves Thompson in prison, awaiting the appeal's outcome. While Mackenzie's family continues their advocacy, the appeal could reshape the sentence, but no verdict can undo the loss. For Mackenzie's son, now in the care of relatives and her loved ones, the fight is as much about honoring her memory as it is about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. The question lingers: will the legal system deliver a punishment that reflects the true cost of Mackenzie's life, or will it fall short again? In Cottonwood Heights, Utah, at 11:47 p.m., a call was secretly recorded. During that conversation, Jennifer confessed to her lover that she had killed her husband, Matthew. From that moment on, the truth about a seemingly perfect marriage began to emerge, leading to one of the most shocking family crimes in Utah. Jennifer Gledhill and Matthew Johnson seemed to have it all. Living in their million-dollar home in Cottonwood Heights, Utah, they appeared to be the perfect family, a devoted military husband and a caring mother, raising their 3 children, aged 11, 7, and 5. Matthew, 51, was a respected member of the Utah National Guard's 19th Special Forces Group. Known for his reliability and brilliance, his fellow soldiers said he was the kind of man they could always count on for answers. Jennifer, 42, was seen as a devoted mother and supportive military wife, whom many of Matthew's friends described as nice and rather reclusive, but beneath the surface, their marriage had begun to fracture months earlier. In August 2024, Jennifer filed for a temporary protective order against Matthew, claiming she needed protection from him. Yet, when the case reached 3rd District Commissioner Russell Minus, he dismissed the request. The commissioner noted that text messages from Jennifer to Matthew were repeatedly berating, belittling, and demeaning, if not outright attempts, to goad him into a violent response. On the 16th of September, 2024, just days before the tragedy that would shatter their family forever, Commissioner Minus dismissed the protective order, ruling that no abuse had occurred. In the weeks leading up to September, Matthew's friends noticed changes. Jennifer's behavior had become so erratic that Matthew sometimes stayed overnight at a National Guard facility, telling those close to him that he feared for his safety. In one of his final conversations with a longtime friend, retired Guardsman Kevin Thompson, Matthew said he was ready to move on and file for divorce. Behind his back, Jennifer was living a double life. She was deeply involved in an affair with another man, an affair so intense that it consumed her thoughts. On the 19th of September, just days before Matthew's death, Jennifer showed her lover a loaded Glock 19X she kept in the home. At the time, he brushed it off. Firearms weren't unusual in a military family, but prosecutors later argued this was part of a calculated plan. She had arranged for their 3 children to stay at her parents' house the night she planned to kill Matthew. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. The 20th of September, 2024, began like any other day. But by evening, the fragile facade of the marriage would finally crumble. Matthew had discovered the truth about his wife's affair, and witnesses would later report hearing a heated argument between the couple that night. According to Jennifer's later confession, Matthew confronted her, yelling because he knew she had been sleeping with someone else. The argument was intense, years of marital problems finally exploding into the open. What happened next would haunt everyone who learned about it. In the early hours of the 21st of September, 2024, as Matthew lay sleeping in their master bedroom, completely vulnerable and unaware of the danger, Jennifer made a decision that would destroy him forever. She took his own 9mm handgun and shot him in the head while he slept. By her own confession, she then put Matthew's body into a rooftop storage container, sliding it down the stairs of their home before loading it into the back of their minivan. She smashed his phone and drove his truck to a nearby neighborhood, abandoning it blocks from their home. Then, in what can only be described as a methodical cover-up, Jennifer drove north with her husband's body and buried him in a shallow grave at a location that remains unknown to this day. When she returned home, She began an extensive cleanup operation. She bleached the walls, used carpet cleaning supplies throughout the master bedroom, and ordered a new mattress to replace the blood-soaked one where Matthew had been killed. The mattress arrived just 2 days later, but Jennifer's most critical mistake was yet to come. On the 22nd of September, just before midnight, Jennifer showed up at her lover's home and made a confession that would ultimately lead to her arrest. She told him everything: how she had killed Matthew, how she had disposed of his body, and how she had cleaned up the crime scene. The man noticed bruises on Jennifer's body during their conversation, and when he asked about them, she casually explained that she had gotten them while burying her husband and cleaning the house of evidence. Her lover was terrified by what he had heard. Jennifer, whom he thought he knew, had just confessed to cold-blooded murder with an almost casual demeanor. The truth was about to come out, and it was worse than anyone imagined. Jennifer's lover was so disturbed by her confession that he decided to record their next phone conversation. When he told Jennifer that he was frightened by what she had told him, her response was chilling and would become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. She exclaimed that she thinks she could even hurt a fly, and said that Matthew's not a person. He wasn't a person anymore. The cold detachment in her voice was unmistakable. She had dehumanized her husband so completely that his death meant nothing to her. But Jennifer's disturbing revelations didn't stop there. When her lover asked if she would do anything differently if she could turn back time, Jennifer replied, no. She also asked her lover not to think of her as a monster and to remember who she was before the confession. The irony was not lost. She was asking for understanding after confessing to murdering the father of her children in cold blood. What made this conversation even more significant was that it took place before Matthew was officially reported missing. Jennifer was already referring to her husband in the past tense. Even though no one else knew he was dead, 6 days after confessing to her lover, Jennifer finally reported Matthew missing to the police. She told them that Matthew had said he would be gone for a week and instructed her not to call him. Meanwhile, the Utah National Guard had already begun searching for Matthew when he failed to report for duty on the 23rd of September. Unbeknownst to Jennifer, her lover had been collecting evidence against her, including screenshots of their text messages and recordings of their phone conversations. On the 2nd of October, 2024, he contacted the police with information that would crack the case wide open. On the 2nd of October, 2024, armed with the recorded confessions and physical evidence, police arrested Jennifer Gledhill on charges of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. When Cottonwood Heights, Utah police executed a search warrant on the Gledhill home, they discovered a scene that told a very different story than the one Jennifer had presented. In the master bedroom, investigators found a large blood-stained spot on the carpet beneath the bed. Blood was also found on the bed frame slats, which corroborated Jennifer's confession to her lover. The house reeked of bleach, and there were reddish-brown stains on the walls, bed frame, and blinds. Tellingly, the mattress in the bedroom was brand new. Phone records later revealed that Jennifer had ordered it on the 24th of September, just 3 days after the murder. It had been delivered 2 days later. During the investigation, police also discovered GPS data from Jennifer's phone showing her movements on the 21st of September and 22nd. The data showed her traveling to the location where Matthew's truck was found at around 6 o'clock a.m., and later tracking her journey north toward Davis County, exactly where she claimed to have buried his body. But the investigation was far from over. On the 24th of October, 2024, Jennifer's parents, Thomas Gledhill, 71, and Rosalie Gledhill, 68, were also arrested and charged with 4 counts of obstruction of justice. Police discovered that they had spent over 5 hours at Jennifer's house in late September, despite initially claiming they were only there for less than an hour to pick up clothing. Investigators found that Rosalie had purchased the new mattress and had her phone remotely reset, erasing all data about her whereabouts during the cleanup period. When police questioned Thomas about the master bedroom and the alleged cleanup, he said he did not go in where the incident happened, inadvertently revealing knowledge of a crime scene. During a search of Jennifer's parents' home, police found a Glock 19X gun box wrapped in a child's onesie inside a plastic tote near Jennifer's bedroom. The container matched the description of the gun Jennifer had shown to her lover on the 19th of September. The family had tried to cover up the perfect murder, but their web of lies was quickly unraveling. Months have passed since Jennifer's arrest, but Matthew Johnson's body remains missing. Extensive search efforts have covered multiple counties, extending from Davis counties all the way to Box Elder County near the Utah border. Over 70 searchers have participated in the ongoing efforts to find Matthew, including law enforcement, volunteers, and Matthew's own military friends who have organized their own search parties. As his friend Kevin Thompson said, "The fact that the search is now in its 5th month keeps them up at night." John Hash, Matthew's fellow Green Beret, who served with him for 12 years, has been frustrated by the ongoing search efforts. He said, having had Jennifer in his home before, breaking bread with them, it turned out she's responsible for Matthew's death. It was shocking. Frankly, during recent court hearings, prosecutors revealed that a vehicle storage container had been found floating in water and it contained Matthew's blood inside. This discovery provided additional physical evidence linking Jennifer to the crime, but Matthew's body still hasn't been recovered. The search continues to expand across northern Utah as investigators follow every lead, hoping to finally bring Matthew home to his family. They were about to discover a secret Jennifer had hoped would never see the light of day. Jennifer Gledhill has pleaded not guilty to all charges against her. She faces 1 count of first-degree murder, 5 counts of obstruction of justice, 1 count of possession of a controlled substance, 1 count of abuse or desecration of a human body, and 1 count of tampering with a witness. During her bail hearing, prosecutors argued that Jennifer posed a significant danger to the community and to the integrity of the investigation. They revealed that she had told her lover she would shoot herself rather than go to jail, demonstrating both her desperation and potential for further violence. The judge sided with the prosecutors and denied Jennifer's request for bail, noting the risk she posed to the community. She remains in custody at the Salt Lake County Jail. Adding another layer of complexity to the case is the matter of Matthew's $500,000 Credential life insurance policy, with Jennifer named as the beneficiary. Because Jennifer is facing murder charges and Matthew's body is still missing, Credential has asked the court to determine who should receive the money. Jennifer's trial is scheduled to begin on the 8th of December, 2025, and is expected to last 8 days. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this case is the plight of the 3 children who have lost both parents, 1 to murder and 1 to imprisonment. Matthew Johnson's family has released a statement through their victim representative saying they are hopeful that they will find Matthew soon, or that Jennifer or someone will come forward with the location of his body so they can properly lay him to rest. The prosecution's theory is straightforward but chilling. Jennifer Gledhill killed her husband because he discovered her affair, and she wanted to be free to pursue her relationship with her lover rather than go through a messy divorce that might have resulted in shared custody and financial obligations. She chose murder. As we await Jennifer Gledhill's trial in December 2025, one question haunts everyone involved in this case. How does a mother of 3 justify destroying so many lives for the sake of an affair? Perhaps we'll never fully understand the depths of her selfishness and cruelty. What we do know is that her actions have created wounds that will never fully heal. Justice may eventually be served, but Matthew Johnson will never come home to his children, and somewhere in northern Utah, A devoted father and soldier lies in an unmarked grave, waiting for someone to finally tell the truth about where he can be found. On May 24, 2013, Fabiana Luzzi, a 16-year-old girl from the small town of Corigliano Calabro, Italy, suddenly disappeared, leaving her family in shock and fear. A few days later, the police discovered her body in a remote area, charred and disfigured beyond recognition. The autopsy revealed a truth that shocked the whole of Italy. Fabiana had not only been stabbed more than 20 times, but while still gasping for breath, she had been doused with gasoline and set on fire by her boyfriend, Davide Marone. However, what outraged the public even more was the sentence handed down to the perpetrator of this barbaric crime. Although the act showed signs of being premeditated, Davide was not tried as an adult, but only as a teenager. He received a sentence that was considered too light for the crime that took the life of a young woman, leaving her family with an indelible pain. And since then, a question has haunted Italy. How could a man who stabbed, burned, and murdered a girl receive such a light sentence? How many more lives will be lost before justice is truly on the side of those who died? Fabiana Luzzi grew up in a close-knit family in Corigliano Calabro, Italy. She was energetic, active, and strong-willed, traits that became especially clear in her teenage years. She didn't like being bossed around by her parents and started thinking about moving out. This tension led to frequent conflicts, and by 16, Fabiana decided to live on her own. She rented an apartment not far from her family and took a part-time job to support herself. At first, her income wasn't enough, so her parents helped financially. Despite the conflicts at home, Fabiana was a good student. Her parents had high hopes for her. By 2013, she was a 16-year-old high school student who loved dancing and was taking accounting courses, planning a future in that field. She was also in an on and off relationship after she moved out. Her relationship with her parents improved. With fewer daily arguments, things seemed to stabilize, and Fabiana appeared to be managing adult life well. May 24, 2013, began like any other day. No one expected what was to come. Early that morning, Fabiana left for school. She stayed in touch with her parents by phone, as she usually did, to reassure her mother. She planned to stop by her parents' house after lunch. They were expecting her that evening to continue preparing for their summer vacation. But Fabiana never arrived. Her parents, Mario, Luzzi, and Rosa, became worried when she didn't answer her phone. At first, they didn't panic. They went to her apartment, but no one answered the door. Despite persistent knocking, the landlord provided a spare key, and they found the place empty. With Fabiana still not responding, they headed to her school to see if she had stayed late. On the way, they ran into Fabiana's classmate and friend. The girls said Fabiana had left right after classes, and they hadn't seen her since. Alarmed, her parents reported her missing to the police. Initially, both the family and the police suspected she might have run away. She had done so about a year earlier, before her parents allowed her to live independently. In early spring 2012, she had gone to Bologna after long-standing conflicts at home. Back then, the police quickly found her. Friends said she was staying with acquaintances, and although they did not know her exact address, she kept in touch with her family, which made the situation easier to resolve. This time, Rosa tried to believe it was another runaway, but two things didn't add up. First, unlike the previous time, Fabiana hadn't contacted anyone, and her phone was switched off. Second, she had no reason to run away. She already lived on her own and was satisfied with her life. The Carabinieri began questioning Fabiana's friends and acquaintances. She had a wide social circle, many of whom her parents had already called. No one knew where she was. However, useful leads emerged. The police went to her school to speak with classmates and teachers who might have noticed something unusual. Friends said Fabiana was anxious that day because she planned to meet her boyfriend. A classmate saw 17-year-old David Maroney meet her near the school after classes. He arrived on his scooter, which he often used to pick her up. After that meeting, no one saw Fabiana again. This meant her boyfriend was the last known person to have contact with her. According to her friends, an argument began as soon as he arrived. Davide accused her of infidelity, which she denied. As the search continued, no solid leads emerged. Police wanted to question Davide, but he didn't answer his phone and wasn't at home. His parents said he had left for school early that morning and hadn't returned. While trying to find him, the detectives gathered information about his troubled relationship with Fabian. Fabiana's friends consistently described a jealous relationship on both sides. They also said Davide had been unfaithful. Fabiana had told them she once caught him kissing another girl, which led to a breakup. After that, they made up. Police interviewed everyone they could, but couldn't immediately reach Davide. He was also a high school senior, 17 years old, in 2013. Fabiana's family and friends said that after the breakup, Davide repeatedly tried to see her and even came to her home. Refusing to accept her refusal, David remained missing for almost a day. Then he turned up at a hospital with severe burns on his face and hands, serious enough to require treatment. His condition drew police attention because the injuries looked like they came from handling flammable substances. When asked how he was burned, he refused to cooperate. Under pressure, he eventually claimed he had been attacked by strangers on the street. He did have injuries on his hands that could be defensive, but they looked more like wounds sustained while someone else was fighting for their life. The source of the burns remained suspicious. Since Davide wouldn't fully explain them, police did not believe his story. He also flatly denied any involvement in Fabiana's disappearance and insisted they hadn't met that day. Even though multiple witnesses confirmed they had, detectives saw many inconsistencies in his account and concluded he was lying. Still, suspicion alone wasn't enough. They needed concrete evidence about what happened to Fabiana. They held off on releasing Davide, and under continued questioning, he began to change his story. First, he admitted he had picked her up after school. Then he claimed he dropped her off at a friend's house and never saw her again. That was quickly disproven. No one in her circle had seen her after classes. Confronted with this lie, Davide changed his account again. He now admitted he picked Fabiana up on his scooter and that they argued near the school. He accused her of seeing someone else. According to him, the argument continued as they rode away. Fabiana sits behind him, denying infidelity and refuting his accusations. They didn't get far. A few kilometers from the school, he stopped in a secluded area. The argument escalated. They shouted until he lost his temper and announced their relationship was over. He said he then jumped on the scooter and drove away, claiming he had no idea what happened to her. After that, the detectives learned from Davide where everything had happened. 2 officers checked the location but found nothing suspicious. Meanwhile, they spoke with Fabiana's relatives, who all said Davide would never let her go. They described him as obsessive and manipulative, someone who stalked her after she tried several times, unsuccessfully, to end the relationship. This supported the Carabinieri's concerns about Davide's behavior, but they needed stronger evidence. On May 25, 2013, a call came into the local station from a man living a few kilometers from the school. While working in a citrus grove, he found signs of a fire and pieces of what looked like women's clothing. It seemed minor at first, but the police had a detailed description of what Fabiana wore the day she disappeared. The burnt fabric matched. The situation grew more serious. Still, there was no body. Investigators avoided premature conclusions and questioned Davide again. He continued to deny everything, insisting he knew nothing. Notably, the location of the fire was near the area he had previously directed police to, suggesting he may have been trying to distract them. Another day passed. Davide spoke with detectives in the presence of a prosecutor and his lawyer. He began to crack. His story had changed several times, and now he said he would tell the truth. He admitted they had a fight that escalated. He claimed Fabiana attacked him and things spiraled out of control. When he stopped, it was too late. He said he started a large fire to destroy evidence and told the police where to find Fabiana's body. The body was found not far from the site of the fire. Fabiana was dead, and her body was badly burned. Requiring testing to fully identify her, all materials were sent for examination. She was identified through dental records as 16 years old, Fabiana Luzzi. Her family was devastated. She died just weeks before her next birthday. Davide said Fabiana attacked first, and he lost control. He claimed he carried a knife for everyday tasks and used it to stab her. Although he called it self-defense, the more than 20 stab wounds on Fabiana's body could not support this claim, especially since David only suffered minor injuries. Interrogations continued. Despite his lies, Davide was the only source for details about Fabiana's death, and investigators pressed on. He then said Fabiana fell to the ground and stopped moving, and that he set the body on fire to hide the crime. That was false. Forensic analysis showed Fabiana was alive when she was set on fire. Her lungs were full of smoke. She burned alive. The Carabinieri suspected Davide was still minimizing his guilt. Eventually, Davide admitted Fabiana was alive when he doused her with gasoline and lit the fire. He saw her breathing and trying to get up, and he stopped her. According to the forensic expert, although she suffered more than 20 stab wounds, none struck vital organs or major arteries. She could have died from blood loss, but only after a long time, and she might have survived with timely medical help. That was not what David intended. These findings supported the conclusion that the crime was premeditated. Numerous witnesses had described ongoing tension between Fabiana and Davide. Shortly before Fabiana's death, their relationship had reached one of its most turbulent phases. Her best friend said that she had broken up with David and was trying to get her life together. She likely had started seeing someone else. For a haunted young man like David, this could have been a powerful motivation to commit a crime. Detectives were struck by how cold-blooded Davide seemed. He appeared emotionless and kept resisting, forcing investigators to extract every word. It took the Carabinieri 2 days of questioning to get the most plausible account. According to Davide, he met Fabiana that day after she finished her classes. He wanted to talk about their relationship again, but she insisted it was over. David refused to accept her decision, believing she simply wanted more attention from him. He chased after her and tried to court her, but he was wrong. She was firm and did not want to reconcile. In the heat of the argument, Fabiana said she already had a new boyfriend and would not get back together. That comment sealed her fate. In a jaloux rage, Davide grabbed a knife and stabbed her more than 20 times. It happened in a deserted area on the outskirts of the city. There was no one to intervene, and he did not stop. Even after Fabiana fell to the ground bleeding, she was still alive. Davide still did not call for help. Instead, he went to his scooter, took a small gasoline canister, and poured it over her while she was still alive. He then set her on fire. Fabiana continued to struggle, but she could no longer save herself. The heartbreaking case drew intense public and media attention. Fabiana's family could not accept that their daughter's life ended so tragically. Everyone remembered Fabiana as a cheerful, active girl who had recently been seeking freedom and independence, perhaps a factor that contributed to her death. After moving out and living independently, she rarely shared her relationship with her parents, mainly confiding in her friends. As a result, her parents could not fully grasp the danger. Fabiana's close friends described her relationship with David as unhealthy. She quickly became disillusioned with him. He was obsessive, extremely jealous, and often provoked conflicts, sometimes just because a boy on the street said hello to her. The situation was difficult to control, especially since she was still in school. Relatives heard about the breakup but did not realize he was acting like a stalker, and that the two had resumed seeing each other. Tensions escalated. During the breakup, Fabiana complained to friends about him and wanted to report him to the police, hoping that would stop him from haunting her further. His behavior was frightening. For reasons unclear, his parents did not seem concerned about their son's condition. Many witnesses described Davide as aggressive, antisocial, and strange. He struggled to make new friends and showed signs of cruelty, which his family appeared to dismiss with a peculiar indifference. He had long been a troubled young man with possessive tendencies. An ex-girlfriend had warned others about him. She needed help from adults to scare him off, and only then did he leave her alone. Fabiana, however, wanted to handle the situation herself. Davide also had a difficult personal history and behavioral problems from an early age. These issues worsened amid domestic violence after his parents divorced. His first stepfather was an alcoholic who drank daily and often started fights, beating Davide and his mother. Although they separated from him quickly, the damage was done. Perhaps this contributed to Davide's cruelty. He could not let Fabiana go when she tried to free herself from his control. Based on this, detectives believe David was still hiding the full truth. The circumstances suggested he had lured her to the deserted area with the intention to kill. The gasoline canister strongly indicated premeditation. Davide did not typically carry extra fuel. He rarely rode his scooter outside the city, and its fuel efficiency meant a full tank was usually sufficient. Most disturbing was the brutality he inflicted on Fabiana, a fragile young woman. Her friends were convinced she would never have willingly followed her boyfriend to such an isolated place. She would have sensed immediately that something was wrong. Fabiana's funeral was held on May 28, 2013, at the town hall, where about 5,000 people gathered to pay their respects. Local TV channels and newspapers closely covered the event. The tragedy reignited public debate about femicide and the vulnerability of girls in relationships with manipulative partners. During the ceremony, Fabiana's family and friends spoke, as did the leader of her religious community. They offered support to the family and expressed hope that the perpetrator would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. Many people once again asked how to prevent the recurring violence that claims young lives. Meanwhile, Davide Moroni was arrested. He confessed and is awaiting trial in prison. Fabiana's relatives demanded he be tried as an adult, citing the crime's cruelty, planning, and attempts to conceal evidence. Although prosecutors advocated trying David as an adult, the judge ruled that he would be tried as a juvenile. His mental health became a point of contention. Witnesses, including his ex-girlfriend, described troubling behavior, prompting evaluations. However, experts found no condition that would justify legal limitations on responsibility. Declared mentally competent, Davide stood trial. Because he confessed, the proceedings were expedited. Fabiana's family attended every stage, determined to see justice served. He was found guilty and initially sentenced to 22 years in prison. Davide appealed, arguing procedural errors in the mental health evaluation and seeking a reduced sentence. An independent expert hired by the defense later concluded he was only partially competent. As a result, the appeals court reduced his sentence to 18 years and removed premeditation as an aggravating factor, allowing further appeals to proceed. There remained a risk his sentence could be reduced even more. Since Davide was a minor at the time of the crime, Fabiana's family could not join the criminal case as a civil party, but they continued to push for a harsher outcome, believing the sentence was too lenient. In 2015, the court ordered Davide's parents to pay €300,000 in compensation to Fabiana's family. The defense disputed this, but the family's lawyer argued that Davide's parents shared responsibility for his upbringing. The court agreed, finding that they failed to provide adequate supervision, including medical care and access to full education. The judge noted they did not monitor him sufficiently and missed the period when his mental health issues began. No records showed psychiatric consultations or appropriate treatment for David. A lack of care that the court concluded contributed to the tragedy. Mario Luzzi, Fabiana's father, expressed strong indignation towards the Ministry of Justice and even appealed directly to the president. His anger stemmed from the fact that Davide Morone received concessions while in prison. Davide reportedly behaved well, avoided conflicts, and actively participated in a rehabilitation program. Because of this, he was periodically allowed temporary release. Fabiana's family condemned the decision as absurd, arguing that the laws protect perpetrators rather than victims. Mario wrote extensively about the pain of losing his daughter, saying that such leniency toward her killer only deepens their suffering. Fabiana's family has kept her memory alive. Since 2013, they have held a vigil every May 24 and organized awareness campaigns to share her story. Aligning these efforts with initiatives against gender-based violence, their work has drawn attention from organizations addressing similar issues at broader levels. In 2025, for the 12th anniversary of Fabiana's death, the Anti-Violence Center hosted the commemoration. The organization offers legal and psychological support to women in abusive or dangerous relationships. The events took place in a municipal suburban park in a square dedicated to Fabiana Luzzi, which has become a symbolic site. Despite these efforts, the family believes that the legislation remains excessively lenient. The story of Maria Paola Gaglione and Ciro Migliore is not only a tragedy of two young people, but also a mirror of a society still bound by prejudice and hatred. In Caivano, where violence is disguised as honor, their love is considered a disgrace and must be extinguished at all costs. That night, Maria and Ciro were walking down the dark road when an engine roared behind them. The person chasing her was no stranger, but her own brother. The pursuit ended in a tragic accident. Maria died, and Ciro, her lover, could only cry in despair next to her cold body. But justice was not on their side. The person who caused Maria's death was sentenced to only 9.5 years in prison. The whole world was shocked and wondered, why can loving someone cost you your life? Stay tuned till the end of the video to discover the full truth behind this tragedy. Maria Paola Gaglione was born in July 2002 in Caivano, a small Italian town known for high crime and strict traditions. She is the youngest child of Franco Gaglione and Pina Aimo. Her only brother, Michele Antonio Gaglione, is 12 years older than her and has always been protective of her and often treats her more like a daughter than a sister. The Gaglione family followed rigid traditional values. Men were expected to lead, women were taught to obey, daughters were raised to follow their parents' rules, while sons felt responsible for defending the family's honor. even by controlling their younger sister's choices. Growing up in that environment, Maria seemed as though she would follow the path that had been set for her. But things changed when she entered her teens. At 15, she met Ciro Migliore, 4 years older. Their friendship grew into love. Ciro wasn't like other boys in their neighborhood. He was born female and, at 15, began transitioning to live as the man he knew himself to be. For Maria, this was not a barrier. She loved Ciro and supported him completely, determined to stand by him through a difficult, brave journey. But while they found strength in each other, their surroundings were hostile. For her family, being with Ciro was seen not just as unconventional, but as a disgrace. Their disapproval weighed heavily on her. Under constant pressure, Ciro and Maria decide to keep their relationship a secret. For nearly 3 years, they hid their love from most people. Despite isolation, their bond deepened, sustained by affection, a desire for freedom, and the dream of living openly. When she turned 18, Maria mustered up the courage to face her family. She abandoned her parents' expectations, her studies, and her pre-established model. She chose to leave home and run away with Ciro. They stayed at the home of a relative of Ciro's, about 10 kilometers from Caivano. It wasn't far, but it gave them a fragile independence. They had no money, no home of their own, and no steady jobs. Still, for 23 days, they lived together, believing love would be enough. During this time, her parents received no news from her. Then, on the night between September 11 and 12, 2020, tragedy struck. Around 1:30 a.m., emergency services responded to a call about a road accident. At the scene, there were 2 motorcycles, a large one standing on its kickstand. The other was a small scooter, overturned on the roadside grass, with half of its body obscured by vegetation. A few meters away, Maria lay unconscious. She was just 18. The crash had thrown her from the scooter, and a violent impact against an irrigation pipe cut her throat, killing her instantly. Ciro had been driving the scooter. Despite his injuries, Ciro managed to get up and run to a nearby apartment building, frantically ringing the alarm, saying he had just been in an accident and had injured his hand. They assisted him and called emergency services. He was taken to a local medical center. At first, it looked like a simple accident. Initial reports said a young woman lost control of her scooter, possibly hit by another vehicle, and then ran away. But as investigators dug deeper, a darker reality emerged. It wasn't chance. It wasn't random. It was the end of a chase. The person pursuing them wasn't a stranger. It was her brother. Investigators reconstructed the events. As Maria and Ciro were returning to the relative's home that night, Michel lay in wait. He knew their route and was determined to stop them. On his powerful motorcycle, he followed closely, then swerved in front of them. Repeatedly, he cut across their path, trying to force them to stop. At one point, he even kicked their scooter as they sped along the dimly lit road. Maria, seated behind Ciro, tried to calm Michel. She begged him to stop chasing them and to see that every reckless move put their lives at risk. But Michel's rage made him ignore everything. Consumed by anger and convinced he was defending his family's honor, Michel kept pursuing them. The chase lasted nearly 16 minutes. On a sharp curve, Michele delivered a final, violent kick from the left side. Ciro lost control. The car skidded to the edge of the road and then flipped into the bushes. He broke his arm in the fall but still managed to get up. Maria was not as lucky. Thrown from the scooter, she struck her head and throat against a concrete irrigation pipe. The impact was fatal. She died there on the roadside at just 18 years old. Chase followed. As Ciro tried to regain his footing, Michel caught up and attacked him, punching and kicking in a rage. Maria lay motionless, only a few meters away. Michel stopped only when he realized his younger sister showed no signs of life. In shock, he called his parents and emergency services, fearing for his safety. Ciro ran to a nearby apartment building, rang the intercom, and begged for help. Strangers let him in and called the authorities. He was taken to a clinic with a broken arm, but survived. Soon after, the truth emerged. Michel, 30 years old, married, and a father, was arrested. His first words to the police were chilling. He admitted he had done something stupid. He claimed he never meant to kill Maria, only to punish her for loving a transgender man. He asserted that Maria had always been normal, and he blamed Ciro for leading her astray. He also denied causing the crash, saying he was farther back when it happened. This story soon fell apart. Forensics found bruises and shoe marks on Ciro that matched Michel's motorcycle boots, confirming that Ciro had been attacked after the accident. Witnesses also came forward. Neighbors and acquaintances reported prior threats and violence. This isn't the first time Michel has tried to split Ciro and Maria up. The earliest recorded incident was on July 13 of the same year, when Michel went to Ciro's home and threatened to behead and kill him if he didn't stay away from Maria. Terrified, Ciro never reported the threat, but he never forgot it. Investigators continued to expand their investigation, and new reports suggested that some members of the Gaglione family were involved with local gangs, further complicating the case. Initially, Michel was held in pre-trial detention for personal injury and causing death in the course of another crime. As the evidence mounted, the charges were upgraded to manslaughter and domestic violence with homophobic aggravation. The judge confirmed the homicide charge and the assault on Ciro, which Michel admitted during questioning. Shortly after, Ciro spoke to the press from his hospital bed, in a wheelchair with his arm still fractured. His words were both heartbreaking and defiant. Despite losing Maria, he said that in a way they had already won, because they had lived their love freely, even if only for a short time. He recounted their memories and said that, although he tried to explain his love to her family never accepted it. To her family, he and Maria were just two women, and their relationship was forbidden. He recalled hearing some relatives say they would rather see their daughter dead than in love with someone like him. For Ciro, Michel was the most vehemently opposed, refusing to understand or accept. Meanwhile, Maria's parents stayed silent. They avoided speaking to the media, relying instead on their parish priest and lawyers. From the beginning, they insisted it was an accident. In their view, their son, Michel, was only trying to bring Maria home, not kill her. Maria's family published an open letter explaining their choice to remain silent, saying it was their way of mourning her with dignity and love. They insist their objection is not because Ciro is transgender, but because they believe he is untrustworthy. They portrayed Ciro as a negative influence, a young man often in trouble, without steady work, living by his wits. Still, even while defending Michel, they conceded that only time would reveal whether their fears had been justified. In sharp contrast, Ciro's mother spoke out publicly. Overcome with anger and grief, she asserted that Michel knew exactly what he was doing and was driven by his refusal to accept that his younger sister loved a transgender man. She accused the Gaglione family of setting a trap, claiming they pretended to seek peace only to lure Ciro back into danger. On September 15, 2020, just days after the crash, the town of Caivano gathered to bid farewell to Maria. The church filled with applause as white balloons rose into the sky and doves were released in her memory. Through their lawyer, the Gaglione family invited the entire LGBTQ community to attend the funeral. Yet, despite this public gesture, they did not allow Ciro, Maria's chosen partner, to say goodbye to the woman he loved. That same day, still in the hospital, Ciro turned to social media. He shared a message full of grief and love, noting it would have been their 3rd anniversary. His words expressed the pain of loss and the pride of a love that, to him, had triumphed against the odds. If only briefly, the story of Maria and Ciro resonated far beyond their families. Across Italy and beyond, people compared their tragedy to a modern-day Romeo and Juliet. Thousands, who had never met them, mourned openly, moved by a love that fought to exist and was brutally cut short. On social media, Maria's face became a symbol for many who had suffered in silence. Young people, parents, friends, and neighbors posted photos, drawings, and letters. Candles were lit, flowers placed at the crash site, rainbow flags raised high. The message was clear: love should never cost a life. But grief mingled with anger. Many rejected the family's attempt to downplay what happened, refusing to see it as a mere accident or a family dispute gone wrong. To them, it was an act fueled by hatred, intolerance, and a violent refusal to accept difference. The tragedy quickly became a national issue. Italy's parliament came under pressure to advance the long-delayed Zan law, aimed at addressing hate crimes and protecting the rights of transgender and homosexual individuals. As the public demanded justice, the courts proceeded. On the day of Maria's funeral, her brother Michel appeared before the investigating judge for more than 2 hours of questioning. He again claimed he never meant to hurt his younger sister, saying he only wanted a better life for her. His account, however, clashed with the evidence. Investigators had already drawn a different picture. The judge emphasized 3 key points. First, Michel admitted he had deliberately gone out that night to follow his younger sister. Second, he confessed he tried to stop the scooter by kicking it from the side, a claim backed by witnesses and security footage showing the 2 motorcycles dangerously close. Third, after the crash, he attacked Ciro with punches and kicks. Clear evidence, the judge concluded, of uncontrolled rage. The court determined this was not a simple accident. The fall of the scooter was not random. It was the direct result of Michel's reckless pursuit and violent actions. The judge stated that Michel's conduct showed not only aggression, but also a high degree of social danger, creating a strong risk that he could repeat similar acts. As a result, Michel's legal situation changed significantly. His detention was confirmed, and the charges were formally increased. He now faces manslaughter charges, aggravated by motives considered both futile and rooted in homophobia. What began as an apparent accident on a quiet September night is now recognized as something far more sinister, a story of prejudice, control, and rage that left a young woman dead, a young man traumatized, and a community demanding justice. On Thursday, September 17, just days after the crash, Michel broke his silence from prison. From his cell, he wrote a letter that quickly spread across Italian media. He said he felt as if part of his heart had been torn away. The loss of his younger sister, whom he had cared for almost like a daughter, especially given their father's absence during her upbringing. Michel claimed he never intended for any of it to happen and wrote that he could never forgive himself for that night. However, in the same letter, Michel changed her testimony, portraying Ciro in a negative light and describing him as associating with untrustworthy people and dangerous environments. In February 2021, public opinion about Ciro shifted dramatically. During a large anti-banned substance operation across several Italian regions, Ciro was arrested along with 23 others. Authorities accused him of being a small-scale dealer within a banned substance trafficking network. The charges extended beyond banned substance to include weapons offenses, theft, arson, and aiding a detainee's escape from house arrest. Despite having already affirmed his male identity, Ciro was placed in a women's prison because the charges concerned events from 2018 before he had officially begun his gender transition, a decision that fueled debate in an already divided country. His defense argued these were past mistakes, made before his transformation and before his relationship with Maria gave his life new purpose. Meanwhile, the case against Michel continued. In April 2022, the court granted him house arrest with an electronic bracelet, citing good behavior in prison, no prior convictions, and a low risk of reoffending. At 32, he seemed to have secured a measure of leniency, but it did not last. On May 5, the trial began. Prosecutors sought a 22-year sentence, asserting that Michel acted deliberately, killing Maria and attempting to kill Ciro. The defense repeated that Michel never meant to cause harm and only wanted to stop his younger sister. Initially, prosecutors considered adding homophobia as an aggravating factor. As the trial progressed, that element was dropped. Ciro's imprisonment on banned substance-related charges appeared to support the Gaglioni family's claim that their opposition to the relationship stemmed from concerns about his lifestyle rather than prejudice against his gender identity. Ultimately, the judges treated Michel's lack of a criminal record and his behavior in custody as mitigating factors. They downgraded the charges, rejecting voluntary homicide. Michel was convicted of manslaughter and aggravated assault and sentenced to 9 years and 6 months in prison. The verdict drew mixed reactions. To supporters of Ciro and Maria, the verdict felt like a betrayal, diminishing the true nature of the crime. Outside the courthouse, Ciro's lawyer told reporters that the deepest tragedy was not only Maria's death, but also the destruction of a love that had survived poverty, family rejection, and social stigma. Michel's defense appealed, but in June 2024, the appeal was rejected. The sentence was confirmed, leaving no doubt about his legal fate. Still, the trial did not bring closure. It reopened wounds and ignited nationwide debate. For many, the case of Maria and Ciro exposed lingering social tensions, the weight of prejudice, the damage caused by intolerance, and the peril of replacing dialogue with violence. Beyond the legal rulings, the headlines, and the competing narratives, one truth remained: a young woman lost her life, and with her, a love that fought against everything but could not withstand the brutality of hatred. One spring afternoon in 2003, Jacobs was taking a leisurely stroll through the woods behind his house when he spotted something pale among the leaves. It looked like a bone, nothing unusual for the dense forest, but when he nudged it with his foot, the soil shifted, uncovering more. He crouched down, picked one up carefully, and froze. Within minutes, his peaceful woods turned into a crime scene. Police cars crowded the narrow road as forensic teams searched the muddy ground. They found a partial skull, 2 ribs, and almost a full leg. Arch bone showed damage, some cracked, others marked with patterns that first appeared to be animal bites. Under forensic lights, however, the truth became clear: these were knife wounds. That discovery changed everything. Jacobs hadn't found the remains of an animal or the work of nature's decay. He had uncovered evidence of murder. Someone had hidden a woman's body in that forest, trusting the swamp and the passing years to conceal her fate. But the bones refused to stay silent. They were ready to reveal their story. One spring afternoon in 2003, a man named Jacobs was walking in the woods behind his house. As he walked, he spotted something suspicious and realized it was an animal bone. This was not unusual since the area was heavily wooded. However, something caught his eye, so he touched the bone with his foot. It was lying on the ground and could be easily lifted, but underneath it were more bones. When Jacobs pulled up a few of the bones, he realized that the limbs were not animal, but human. Shocked, he immediately contacted the police. Law enforcement arrived quickly, along with forensic specialists, who collected additional remains from the area. They recovered a partial skull, 2 ribs, and nearly a full leg. Bite marks on the bones suggested the remains had been there for some time. The police secured the area and requested more assistance, as the marshy terrain made excavation difficult. Recovering the full skeleton and understanding what happened would prove challenging, since local authorities lacked the necessary expertise. Anthropologist Dr. Albert Nador from the nearby university offered his help. With his student team, he carefully searched the entire site. Their thorough work paid off. They discovered about 160 bones, roughly 80% of a complete human skeleton. The skull revealed the remains belonged to a woman of European ancestry. Based on the level of decomposition, experts estimated that the remains had been there for about a year and a half. Most soft tissue was gone, leaving only dry, weathered bones. The team found numerous marks on the bones that initially resembled animal bites, but forensic experts suspected otherwise. Laboratory tests confirmed the marks were made with a sharp cutting tool, such as a knife, and all were consistent with the same weapon. This indicated the woman was murdered. Further examination revealed broken facial bones, a fractured nose, and several damaged ribs. She had been stabbed multiple times in the abdomen, face, and neck, with at least 10 distinct knife wounds identified. Because of the skeleton's incomplete condition, the numbers may not have been exact, but they clearly showed the violence of the attack. Investigators concluded that the killer acted with extreme anger or hatred, suggesting either a personal connection to the victim or severe emotional instability. Identifying the woman became the main goal of the investigation. But there were few clues. No clothing or belongings were found near the remains. Authorities believed the killer had removed them to prevent identification. The advanced decay also complicated forensic analysis. Investigators reviewed all reports of missing women from the past 18 months. After screening, they compiled a list of about 100 people with suitable characteristics, but the specific identity of the victim was still unknown. DNA testing of the victim was required. Only this method could achieve the highest accuracy. However, extracting a sample of preserved tissue from the bones proved to be very difficult. Unfortunately, conventional methods failed. The body had decomposed severely after spending time in the swamp. Investigators sought help from an anthropologist, hoping to learn at least some physical details about the victim. Albert, the expert, was able to estimate her height, weight, and approximate age by measuring her femur and applying statistical calculations. He concluded that she was of average build and short stature. With this information, detectives compared her characteristics with those on the missing persons list. The process took considerable time. While the lab was struggling to get a DNA profile of the victim, they were able to narrow down the list of possible matches to women who had disappeared in North Carolina. The search radius was about 50 miles. Among them, Scarlett Wood appeared to be the most likely match. Scarlett, a 31-year-old unmarried woman, lived with her mother in the late 1990s. Her mother, Gloria Wood, had liver cancer, so she was always by her mother's side, taking care of her. When detectives met Gloria, she was still alive, but in poor health. Gloria told them that one evening in January 2002, Scarlett went out to a party with friends. She had promised to return around midnight, but never came back. Despite her illness and limited financial means, the mother did everything she could to search for her daughter, even reaching out to the media. Though without success, police had also invested significant time and resources searching for Scarlett, but they found no leads. Gloria now fears she may die without ever knowing her daughter's fate. Investigators asked for Scarlett's dental records, photos, or any personal items that could help identify her if remains were found. They hoped to obtain something suitable for DNA testing, but none of the items left behind were useful. The remains also lacked dental images, making comparisons with dental records useless. Forensic experts said the bones had become brittle from prolonged exposure to sunlight, making conventional DNA analysis impossible. They would need to find a lab with advanced technology or experimental techniques. This delay further postponed the formal identification of the remains. Scarlett is believed to be the closest match to the remains found. However, definitive evidence was needed to make a formal forensic determination. They sought advice from anthropologist Albert, who proposed using photo or video superimposition techniques. The plan was to overlay photographs of Scarlett provided by her mother onto digital images of the skull. Though the result wouldn't produce a realistic image, an experienced anthropologist could compare anatomical points to identify similarities or inconsistencies. It was a rudimentary method, but it could help eliminate false leads. However, the University of North Carolina lacked the necessary software and tools for such forensic imaging. Albert contacted a colleague who recommended a specialized program designed for anthropological and forensic work, similar to image editing software, but with more precise capabilities. This analysis revealed numerous matches between the skull's structure and Scarlett's photos. Although still insufficient for official identification, it strengthened investigators' confidence that they were on the right path. Detectives were increasingly certain the bones belonged to Scarlett. They shifted their focus beyond identification, investigating her social circle and interviewing her relatives and friends. The first solid lead came from her mother, who mentioned that she rented out a small guest house on her property to two young men. The men, both in their mid to late 20s, were checked against police records. Neither had a history of violence, but one had been charged with banned substance trafficking, and the other was a suspect in several burglary cases. When police met with Gloria, she said the two tenants had left about a year and a half ago, and she had no idea where they were. This coincided with the time of Scarlett's disappearance, which made the police even more suspicious. Gloria allowed them to search the guest house where the two had been staying. By chance, the guest house was empty. Inside, they discovered belongings that did not belong to the Wood family. Investigators believed the tenants had left suddenly, abandoning some of their possessions. One of the men was soon tracked down in a suburb of North Carolina, about 45 kilometers from the city. When questioned, the man immediately denied involvement in Scarlett's disappearance. He admitted to knowing her, but only as a landlord and tenant. He said the same about the second renter and explained that he moved out hastily due to financial difficulties. He also said he avoided the police because of previous legal troubles. A financial review confirmed he had been unable to keep paying rent. He maintained his innocence in Scarlett's death, but detectives were puzzled by how certain he seemed that she was dead. When asked, he explained that he had known the Wood family for years and believed that if someone as responsible as Scarlett had been gone this long without returning to care for her ailing mother, she must be dead. His explanation, however, sounded unconvincing and only increased investigators' suspicions. The police decided to confirm their suspicions and returned to the Wood family's guest house for a more detailed investigation. They sprayed luminol across the entire house, but found no traces of old blood, not even microscopic ones. This confirms that the attack on Scarlett did not take place there. After that, they discovered that the second lodger in the Woods family guest house had died shortly before the body was found. Further investigation revealed that he was likely not involved in Scarlett's disappearance. The police then turned their attention to Scarlett's close circle, her friends, her acquaintances, and her co-workers. Her best friend, Lynn Bollinger, provided important information. Lynn said she had been with Scarlett the night before she disappeared. They had gone to a party hosted by a mutual acquaintance, which took place every Friday night. The organizer had rented a hotel room instead of their own home to host the party and stayed overnight. According to Lynn, several men and women came and went throughout the night. Around 5 people in total, all familiar faces from their neighborhood or social circle. Lynn said that she didn't notice anything unusual, except that a friend of the host repeatedly tried to flirt with Scarlett. That person was John Wayne Boyer. Around 2 o'clock a.m., Lynn, feeling exhausted, left for home, while Scarlett chose to stay. By that time, most of the guests had also gone, leaving only the host, Scarlett, and John Boyer, a 40-year-old truck driver, had a modest and unstable career. He was known to drink heavily, enjoy parties, and avoid forming close friendships. Since he no longer lived in the area, investigators had to locate him for questioning. They discovered that he had already been questioned about a year and a half earlier, when Scarlett's mother first reported her missing. At that time, he denied any involvement and provided no useful information. Now, when police found him living in a nearby suburb, he again denied any connection to Scarlett's death. However, detectives noticed he spoke about her in the past tense. Even though he had not been informed about the discovery of a skeleton, this raised strong suspicions. John admitted knowing Scarlett, spending time with her, and flirting with her at parties before she vanished. He explained that they met while Scarlett was babysitting for his ex-girlfriend's children. John attended the party because he was a close friend of the organizer. After a tiring day at work, he planned to stay overnight because he was too tired. When Scarlett was about to leave, she asked him for a ride home. John refused, saying he was going to bed, so she decided to walk home alone. This detail makes the story suspicious. According to John, Scarlett left on foot at 3 o'clock a.m. In January, even though the temperature was below -10 degrees Celsius and the journey was about 10 kilometers. Detectives said that it was almost impossible. Given the circumstances, John seemed like a likely suspect, but there was no evidence against him. Investigators began interviewing people close to him. A background check revealed that John and Scarlett were not close. Scarlett had once babysat his ex-wife's children years earlier, but they probably had little contact after that. Their age difference also made a friendship unlikely. Despite John's claim, John's ex-wife said that the first time they met, John looked at Scarlett with a puzzled look, to the point that she refused to let Scarlett continue working as a nanny out of jealousy. Scarlett's relatives and friends all had a bad impression of John. He was an alcoholic, used illegal substances, had been unemployed for a long time, and often behaved aggressively. Several witnesses said he had harassed women before and faced prosecution for it. A friend of Scarlett's remembered that John had expressed interest in her, which made her feel scared. After questioning John, detectives decided to check his story, but released him because there was no solid evidence. They asked witnesses which hotel room hosted the party and examined it using luminol. However, the rooms had been recently renovated, and no traces of blood or evidence were found. The hotel had a new owner, and there were no useful witnesses. Investigators then obtained a warrant to search John's car, but found nothing suspicious there either. Although he was still the main suspect, the victim's identity was not confirmed with certainty. DNA testing proved difficult. Nearly a year later, the samples were sent to a private lab in Pennsylvania, which had more advanced technology. The lab owner suggested extracting the pulp from the victim's tooth to get DNA, and they were eventually successful. Detectives then needed Scarlett's DNA for comparison. Fortunately, they found a sample from a medical test she had undergone before her death. The DNA profiles were an exact match. It was finally confirmed that the remains belonged to Scarlett Wood. The investigation refocused on John Wayne Boyer. He had been the last person seen with Scarlett and had shown an interest in her. By then, he had moved to Augusta, Georgia, just days after police first questioned him. When investigators met with him again, he appeared nervous and agitated, but still denied involvement in Scarlett's disappearance or murder. However, his story began to change. Initially, he claimed Scarlett planned to walk home in the freezing cold, but he later said he might have misunderstood her, as everyone had been drinking. He then added that Scarlett had decided to stay overnight in the same room and planned to drive home with him the next morning. John claims that he and Scarlett tried to get close, but were unable to do so. Scarlett then taunted and insulted him, leaving him feeling hurt and angry. Despite changing some parts of his testimony, he continued to maintain his innocence and that he had never touched Scarlett. After hours of questioning, John finally confessed. He said an argument had turned into a fight, during which he pushed Scarlett, causing her to fall and hit her head on a coffee table. She then collapsed, stopped moving, and didn't respond to him. Although some details didn't fully match the known facts, this was considered a significant breakthrough because John admitted involvement in Scarlett's death. Detectives concluded he now had a motive for murder. They believed he had tried to seduce her, was rejected, and reacted violently. However, the extent of Scarlett's injuries, including multiple fractures to her ribs, nose, and face, didn't align with a single accidental fall. Additionally, John never mentioned a knife. Even though Scarlett's body showed numerous stab wounds, he insisted it had been an accident. Realizing she was dead and fearing imprisonment, he decided not to go to the police. Instead, John tried to hide the body. He first took it to an abandoned industrial site, but later moved it to a swampy, wooded area where it was discovered a year and a half later. Despite various interrogation tactics, John stuck to his version of events. Investigators believe the killing was violent and may have been motivated by abuse or even premeditated murder. Scarlett had been stabbed many times and brutally beaten. John argued that he had inflicted the injuries after she was dead, while trying to conceal the body, but this explanation did not fit the evidence. John denied the allegation of abuse, and since the body was severely decomposed, proving this was impossible, the skeletal state of the body prompted his defense attorney to use it as a mitigating factor. Realizing the risks, the prosecutor offered a plea deal, which John accepted. In April 2007, John pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The verdict brought the case to a swift end and eased the pain for Scarlett's mother, Gloria, who had been following the case from the beginning. John was sentenced to 12 years in prison, a relief to the Wood family. Though they still didn't have the full truth about Scarlett's death, John never revealed the truth. Even after his conviction, he kept his secret. During his incarceration, handwriting analyses and reviews of unsolved local cases suggested possible links to other murders. One such case was the 2006 death of 26-year-old Rose Marie Millette, who had disappeared a year before Scarlett. Her body was later found in a deserted area, showing signs of abuse and multiple stab wounds. Similar to Scarlett's case, when asked about Rose's death, John admitted he met her once as an escort, but denied any involvement in the murder. He refused to cooperate further and demanded legal representation. Though his release was initially scheduled for July 2015, new legal actions on separate charges kept him imprisoned. In 2016, more hearings were held concerning his crimes. Eventually, DNA evidence linked John to another murder, that of Jennifer Smith, who was killed in Tennessee in 2005. While Scarlett's case was still being investigated, prosecutors allege that John took Jennifer to a deserted parking lot, abused her, then strangled her with a seatbelt after an argument over money before dumping her body and leaving the scene. John eventually admitted to committing the attack. Prosecutors were shocked by his deep hostility towards women, noting that he had never married and lived with his mother all his life. After a court hearing, he was found guilty of Jennifer's murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Even then, the investigation did not end. Detectives began to suspect John's involvement in another case, the 2000 murder of 34-year-old Michelle Hagedorn. Her body had been discovered under a tree in an interstate parking lot near the truck stop where John had picked her up. Her identity remained unknown for more than a decade, and a new investigation began only after John became a suspect. Although John initially denied any involvement, he later confessed. That case never went to trial. John died on June 29, 2023. Detectives believe he may have been responsible for several other murders, as his violent temper and long career as a truck driver gave him opportunities to kill and dispose of victims across the country without detection. Investigators have tried to link John to other murders and disappearances that happened frequently in the area where he lived, but so far, no additional victims have been identified. On a quiet summer night in Charlotte, North Carolina, a young woman boarded the last train home after finishing her evening shift at a pizza shop. The security camera captured her calm, ordinary movements, checking the route, finding a seat, scrolling through her phone. Minutes later, the same footage would become evidence in one of the most shocking, random killings the city had ever seen. Her name was Irina Zarutska, a 23-year-old refugee from Kyiv who had survived war, displacement, and the uncertainty of starting over in a foreign land, only to lose her life on a routine train ride. Irina Zarutska was born on May 22, 2002, in Kyiv, Ukraine, to Anna Zarutska and Stanislav Zarutsky. She grew up with an older sister, Valeria, and a younger brother, Bohdan. The Zarutsky household valued education, honesty, and respect for hard work. Her parents instilled in their children a sense of order and discipline. Schoolwork always came before leisure. Chores were shared, and effort was always rewarded. In high school, Irina discovered her passion for art. She enrolled in a vocational college where she studied painting, restoration, techniques for documenting cultural heritage. At the same time, she repaired clothes, made handmade bags to earn her own money. Her family supported her every step of the way. Her father helped her find an internship with a restorer. Her mother offered constant advice. Her siblings photographed her artwork for her portfolio. Education, financial transparency, and online safety were family priorities. Those years in Kyiv shaped Irina's character: diligent, persistent, detail-oriented, and able to combine creativity with practicality, traits that would later define her life. Dreams. But everything changed in February 2022. When Russia's full-scale invasion began, Kyiv came under heavy fire. Air raid sirens became the soundtrack of daily life. For a time, the family tried to keep some sense of normalcy, cooking, fetching supplies, helping neighbors, but soon, reality consumed them. Stanislav stayed behind to reinforce their apartment, while Anna and the children took shelter in cold, damp basements whenever the alarms sounded. Power outages, lost phone signals, fragments of grim news became their new routine. As missiles struck residential areas and stories of neighbors' deaths spread, the danger was impossible to ignore. Faced with that terrifying reality, the family made an agonizing decision to leave Ukraine. It meant abandoning their home, but survival, especially for the children, had to come first. Anna took charge of finding a safe route. She contacted relatives abroad, researched visa and asylum procedures, and compared options: Poland, Germany, or the Czech Republic. In the end, they chose the United States, where friends had offered to help them resettle. The departure was meticulously planned. Irina packed her art projects, sketchbooks, a few sculpting tools she couldn't part with. Valeria gathered the family's documents and medical records, while Bohdan was allowed to bring a few books and his favorite toys. Stanislav, who decided to remain in Ukraine to protect their home, helped organize everything from afar. Watching his family leave without him was devastating, but he believed it was his duty to stay. Crossing the border marked the beginning of a new life. The family completed the necessary paperwork, underwent interviews, and started the long process of securing refugee status. By summer 2022, Irina and her family arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina. There, they received temporary housing and support from local organizations while awaiting the outcome of their asylum application. Life in America was full of challenges: language barriers, financial struggles, the difficulty of adapting to a new culture. Yet, Irina saw it as a new beginning. She believed that only through hard work and determination could she rebuild her life and find her place in this new world. The Zarutsky family stayed close. After arriving in America, Anna focused on keeping the household stable and helping her children adjust to their new environment. Valeria supported her mother, while Irina took the lead in adapting as quickly as possible, enrolling in English classes, searching for part-time work. Bohdan started school and slowly began picking up the language. Stanislav remained in Ukraine, keeping in touch through video calls, holding on to the hope that one day they would all be reunited. Life in Charlotte, North Carolina, greeted the Zarutsky family with a dose of harsh reality: endless paperwork, strict procedures, the immediate pressure to earn an income. The first months were consumed by legal formalities and the struggle to stay afloat. Irina chose the most practical path, studying and working at the same time. She landed a part-time job at a local pizza shop, taking evening shifts so she could attend English classes during the day. Her public transport became her lifeline. She mapped out commutes carefully, timing transfers and train intervals. At the pizza shop, Irina wore many hats. She took orders, assembled pizzas, packed deliveries, handled the register, kept the workspace spotless. She quickly mastered the point-of-sale system, learned food safety standards, followed storage procedures. Management noticed her precision and reliability. She never missed a shift, always arrived on time, often volunteered for extra hours to support the family. Beyond work, Irina also volunteered at a local senior care facility. Her duties included escorting residents to meals, monitoring medication times, logging requests, and helping them video call relatives. Staff admired her calmness, clear communication. She fit naturally into group activities and helped residents feel comfortable. To improve her English, Irina enrolled in classes at a community college. Her goals were focused: to speak confidently at work and to manage official documents without assistance. She kept a detailed vocabulary journal, recording practical words from everyday life: banking, insurance, traffic rules, appliance instructions. She also practiced pronunciation so phone orders at the shop wouldn't cause misunderstandings. The family operated under a strict financial plan. Irina tracked every expense: rent, transportation, food, phone bills, tuition. She saved a portion of each paycheck, determined to earn her driver's license and fund additional training. Valeria helped translate documents, assist with errands, while Anna managed legal paperwork and appointments. Their 2-year roadmap was clear. First, reach college-level English proficiency. Next, obtain a driver's license and buy a small used car for late-night shifts. Finally, expand Irina's skills through industrial sewing and animal care courses at a local center. Irina also dreamed of interning at a cultural institution in Charlotte if a position became available, something that could reconnect her with her artistic roots. Life in Charlotte settled into a rhythm classes during the day, work in the evenings, volunteer hours on weekends. Irina carried the structure and discipline from her old life in Kyiv into every task she undertook. She logged her progress, reviewed goals each month, and constantly refined her schedule. It gave her a sense of control, a reminder that even far from home, she was still building something meaningful. On the evening of August 22, 2025, Irina Zarutska clocked in for her usual shift at the pizza shop. Her schedule was set to end by 10:00 p.m., just in time to catch her train home. Once the shift ended, she followed every closing procedure precisely, cleaned her area, packed the boxes, finalized the inventory log, and signed out of the system. Everything was done by the book. As always, around 9:50 p.m., the shift manager gave her the all-clear to leave. Irina logged out, changed out of her work uniform, and gathered her belongings. Before stepping out, she checked the transit schedule one last time. The next Blue Line train would get her home right on time. The walk to the station was short and familiar. She followed the main road, bright with streetlights and regular traffic signals. Passing a few crosswalks, she soon reached the East-West Boulevard platform. The arrival board showed her train was just minutes away. Everything felt ordinary. A handful of passengers stood scattered along the platform, keeping to the yellow safety lines. Some hovered by the vending machines, others waited quietly near the boarding zones. Irina took her place a few steps back from the edge, pulled out her transit pass, and got ready to board. Overhead announcements echoed through the speakers. Updates on arrivals, safety reminders, standard etiquette notice. The train rolled in right on schedule, brakes hissing as the doors slid open across the platform. Irina waited for the last few people to exit, then stepped inside through the middle door, careful not to block anyone. She spotted an open aisle seat near the middle of the car and settled in. Her backpack rested neatly at her feet, phone in hand, headphones in place. The transit rules prohibited taking extra space, so she sat upright, keeping everything tidy and contained. The train started smoothly, the hum of motion steady beneath her. Stop announcements came clearly through the intercom. A few riders were spread out across the car. Some scrolled on their phones. Others stared into the windows. Plenty of seats remained open. Irina's seat choice gave her a quick exit at her stop. She glanced at the route map above the door, tracing the stops, just to be sure. Her phone stayed on, notifications active, ready in case her family texted after she got off. Up to that point, everything ran exactly as planned. The shift had ended, her route was confirmed, and the train was on time. According to the internal surveillance footage, the scene appeared calm and uneventful. The ceiling camera captured a wide view, another by the door added coverage from a side angle. Irina sat near the middle, facing forward. Moments later, a man entered and took the window seat one row behind her. Separated by a single seatback, there was no exchange, no glance, no word between them. For the first minute after departure, the carriage stayed quiet. Irina remained still, focused ahead. The man beside the window also appeared motionless, his posture slightly turned toward the wall. No movement was visible in his section. Then, in the next minute, he adjusted. His shoulder rolled forward. He leaned subtly toward the aisle. One hand slipped into his hoodie pocket, paused for several seconds, then withdrew slightly as he glanced around. None of the other passengers seemed to notice. No one reacted. The carriage stayed hushed. At the start of the third minute, his movements changed again. He lifted himself slightly, reaching deeper into his pocket. In the frame, a folding object came into view. A metallic glint. His fingers wrapped around the handle. His thumb slid along the locking mechanism. Irina remained unaware, her focus straight ahead, the space between them unchanged. Nothing in his demeanor gave away what was coming. In the 4th minute, the attack began. He stood abruptly, stepped sideways, and delivered 3 rapid strikes aimed at her neck. The footage shows the motions in quick succession, short, sharp, and without hesitation. There were no words, no warning. Irina tried to stand, but stumbled, losing balance. Around here, passengers recoiled, stepping back in confusion and fear. One person darted toward the front of the car. The attacker turned toward the aisle, moving calmly toward the next section. The weapon disappeared below the camera's frame. Doorway footage showed chaos breaking out. Riders pressing themselves against the poles, 2 sliding to the far seats, 1 fleeing through the intercar passage. No one helped. During those critical moments, everyone was paralyzed by fear. Almost immediately, a passenger from the front rows signals toward the operator's cab. On the footage, he can be seen glancing back, gesturing with his hand, and then moving out of sight behind the partition. Shouts and exclamations are audible in the car. Irina remains in her section. 2 other riders appear nearby, looking around and trying to assess the situation. From the first active movement of the assailant to the train's full stop, roughly 2 minutes pass. During this time, the doors remain closed, and the train continues toward the next platform. All onboard systems, lighting, and announcements function normally. Cameras show that the attacker does not return to his seat or approach Irina again. Instead, he keeps a straight path forward down the aisle. The first calls to emergency services come in almost immediately after the assault. 1 passenger from the same car reports a woman who has been injured with a knife, lying on the floor and unable to move. The dispatcher asks for details, the train's direction, line name, and nearest station. The caller doesn't know the exact car number, but describes landmarks inside and confirms the train is heading toward East-West Boulevard. That information is relayed instantly to a police patrol and a county medic team in Mecklenburg County. The call is classified as a trauma with bleeding, with a note about a possible armed suspect still on board. The dispatcher instructs the caller on basic first aid and warns them not to move the victim. A second call comes from a neighboring car. An eyewitness reports seeing the attacker walking down the aisle, apparently heading toward the exit at the next stop. His description of the man's appearance and direction helps police prepare to intercept him on the platform. A third call is logged from the platform itself. The caller says he can see a man stepping off the train who matches the description broadcast over the radio. The dispatcher warns him not to approach, only to keep eyes on the suspect's movements. Meanwhile, the dispatcher stayed on the line with a passenger still inside the train car where Irina lay. Her breathing was labored, but she was still showing signs of life. Eyewitnesses tried to follow instructions. One person kept firm pressure on the wound. Another monitored her breathing and reported any changes. In the background, the dispatcher could hear the conductor's announcements, the sound of braking, and the doors opening. Cues that allowed emergency crews to synchronize their arrival down to the minute. As the train came to a stop, the dispatcher instructed witnesses to meet the medics at the door while maintaining pressure on the injury. He also warned them that police would be detaining the suspect on the platform simultaneously. All calls were logged and time-stamped, later becoming part of the evidence. The train arrived at East-West Boulevard Station. As soon as the doors opened, Charlotte police, already briefed with the suspect's description, moved into position at every exit to prevent escape. A man in dark clothing stepped off the train, matching the description exactly. This was de Carlos de Juan Brown Jr. He did not run. Instead, he walked calmly. Looking around, officers ordered him to stop and raise his hands. Brown complied without resistance. He was quickly handcuffed, and a knife bearing traces of blood was found during the search. After the arrest, he was escorted through a secure passage and handed over to a patrol unit. At that same moment, paramedics entered the train car. Passengers pointed to the young woman lying on the floor. She was unconscious, not breathing. She had sustained 3 knife wounds, 2 to the neck area and 1 to the chest. Witnesses explained they had tried to stop the bleeding by pressing clothing against the wounds, but their efforts had been unsuccessful. The medics immediately began resuscitation measures, applying an oxygen mask and using specialized dressings for several minutes. They tried to restore her heartbeat, but due to severe injury to the neck vessels and massive blood loss, they could not save Irina. She was pronounced dead inside the train car. Following the official pronouncement, police cordoned off the train. The car where Irina Zarutska had been was closed to passengers. As investigators began documenting every detail, forensic technicians photographed the area, collected the knife, and secured her belongings. Witnesses seated nearby were asked to stay for questioning. The atmosphere on the platform was heavy. Shock rippled through the crowd. Some passengers cried quietly. Others stood frozen, unable to grasp what had just unfolded. Officers reassured everyone that the threat was over, urging them to remain calm. Several witnesses later confirmed that the attack came without any warning, leaving the victim no time to react or defend herself. Because the arrest was carried out swiftly and without resistance, law enforcement could fully turn its attention to the investigation. Evidence was carefully gathered at the scene, witness statements were recorded, and precise timestamps were noted. By the time the area was cleared, the first stage of the tragedy had ended. The suspect was in custody, and the incident had formally become a homicide case. Following the medical examiner's confirmation, Irina's body was transported for a full forensic autopsy. Experts verified the police findings. She had suffered 3 stab wounds, 2 of them to the neck, leading to catastrophic blood loss. 1 strike had severed a major artery, making survival impossible even with immediate medical care. Arranging a funeral in the United States proved to be an exhausting ordeal for the Zarutsky family. Her mother and sister, who had already been living in America, shouldered the burden of paperwork and coordination with authorities. Her father, still in Ukraine, could not attend in person. He joined the preparations remotely through video calls. The distance made the pain even harder to bear. He could not say goodbye to his daughter in person, a loss that deepened the family's grief. The funeral took place in Charlotte, North Carolina. Friends and colleagues remembered Irina as gentle, hardworking, full of warmth. At the pizza shop, where she worked part-time, her co-workers spoke of her generosity. She often stayed late, helped others, and never complained. Staff at the senior care facility recalled her patience and empathy toward residents. The service ended with prayers and a moment of silence. Members of the local Ukrainian community stepped forward to help cover burial expenses, turning grief into an act of collective compassion. Irina's story became a painful reminder of how migration and tragedy can intertwine. At the time of his arrest, Brown already had a long history with both law enforcement and mental health institutions. Little is known about his early childhood, but records show he grew up in North Carolina and began encountering the legal system in his teenage years. Court documents indicate that his criminal record started in 2007, when he was still a juvenile. Over the following 7 years, Brown was charged with theft, burglary, armed robbery, and making violent threats. Some cases were dismissed, but his behavior showed little improvement. He drifted between jobs, struggled with stability, and repeatedly returned to crime. In 2014, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for armed robbery. His release in 2020 did not end his troubles. Within months, he appeared again in police reports. In early 2021, Brown was arrested for assaulting his sister and causing injury, followed by charges of property damage and unlawful entry into a restricted area. The following year, in July 2022, he was detained again for disorderly conduct. None of these encounters changed his behavior. By January 2023, his actions had taken a bizarre turn. Brown began making repeated emergency calls from a medical facility, claiming that an artificial material inside his body was controlling his movements. Authorities deemed the issue psychiatric rather than criminal and advised him to seek medical care. After multiple calls, he was briefly detained for misuse of the emergency line but released without bond on his own recognizance. Family medical records revealed a diagnosis of schizophrenia, first made in 2014. Brown's mother had repeatedly sought his involuntary hospitalization after a series of violent outbursts at home. Those stays typically lasted around 2 weeks, followed by brief supervision that quickly ended. In later years, he continued to suffer from delusions involving mind control and external manipulation. Because he never participated in consistent outpatient treatment, relapses became inevitable. Between 2014 and 2025, Brown failed to form stable social ties. His mother and sister eventually cut off all contact for their own safety. Cohabitation, impossible. Records suggest he spent long periods without permanent housing, alternating between shelters and short-term stays. Financial independence eluded him. He never maintained steady employment. At the beginning of 2025, during a court hearing for one of his minor offenses, a judge once again released him on his own recognizance. Despite his homelessness and history of repeat crimes, the oversight imposed was minimal. He only needed to appear in court and follow basic restrictions. Without structured supervision, he slipped through every gap the system allowed. Federal prosecutors have now charged Brown with murder committed on public transit, a federal offense that permits the case to be tried at the national level and opens the door to the death penalty. Prosecutors have stated their intention to pursue the maximum sentence allowed by law. The state has also filed its own first-degree murder charge, but federal jurisdiction gives the U.S. Department of Justice direct authority to petition for capital punishment. The investigation determined that Brown and Irina had never met. Case records confirmed the attack was completely random. Irina had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. There was no evidence of robbery, argument, or any motive suggesting personal gain. Considering Brown's long-documented psychiatric history, investigators believe his actions were likely driven by delusional thinking, noted in prior medical reports. Despite that, the prosecution has classified the incident as intentional homicide, postponing any discussion of Brown's mental state until after a full forensic psychiatric evaluation. For Irina's family and for the public, the lack of a clear motive only deepened the tragedy. The attack appeared to be a pure act of senseless violence. Under federal law, there are only 2 possible sentences for this charge: life imprisonment or the death penalty. The United States Department of Justice must assess several aggravating factors before seeking capital punishment: the brutality of the act, Brown's history of violent offenses, the randomness of the killing, the victim's death, and the fact that it occurred in a public space. In this case, every one of those elements applies. The defense is expected to argue that Brown suffers from a severe mental disorder, potentially undermining his ability to fully comprehend his actions. Yet prosecutors have already made their stance clear. They intend to pursue the death penalty. This decision positions the case as a potential legal landmark, raising difficult questions about mental illness, justice, and public safety. The murder of Irina Zarutska sparked a nationwide debate about public safety and the state of mental health care in the U.S. Officials in Charlotte faced mounting criticism as the public questioned how a man with a history of violent offenses had been released on bail. City Council member Edwin Peacock, 3, said the tragedy shattered public trust, urging both Charlotte Area Transit System and Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department to overhaul security procedures on the Lynx Blue Line. Local leaders, including Mayor V. Lyles, condemned the killing as senseless and heartbreaking, while lawmakers called for stronger safety measures across the city's transit system. In response, Charlotte Area Transit System increased patrols, added ticket checks, and expanded contracts with private security firms. Nationally, the case quickly became political. Conservative commentators accused mainstream media of ignoring the story, and figures like Elon Musk and Donald Trump blamed soft on crime policies for the tragedy. Trump called Irina Zarutska's killer a deranged monster, criticizing local judges and bail reform. His remarks fueled renewed debate over justice reform and the death penalty in North Carolina. The state legislature soon introduced House Bill 307, known as the Irina Law, tightening bail restrictions, mandating GPS monitoring for violent offenders, and reinstating harsher penalties for crimes on public transit. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law in early October 2025. Zarutska's death resonated far beyond North Carolina. Vigils were held in Charlotte and abroad, with Ukrainian officials expressing condolences and President Volodymyr Zelensky honoring her at the United Nations. Artists and activists across the country turned her name into a symbol of loss, injustice, and the urgent call for reform. It was announced that the Rule 24 trial to determine whether Brown would face the death penalty had been postponed until April 2026. On October 22, Brown was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of violence against a railroad company and a public transportation system. A breakup started like many others, filled with arguments, cold silences, and attempts to move on. But the woman in this story couldn't let go. Her love transformed into hatred. Obsession consumed her. For the next 10 years, she relentlessly tried to ruin the life of the man she once lived with. Their failed relationship quickly devolved into a cycle of deceit, manipulation, and increasing violence. To understand how far she was willing to go, we need to go back to where it all started. Rob Parks was born in 1980 in a quiet suburb of Great Britain. He grew up as the middle child among 3 brothers. A good student, Rob focused on building a successful career. At 14, he moved north to study psychology and criminology at university. Though bright, he lacked self-confidence, was painfully shy around girls. That changed when he joined the University Drama Society. Within a year, he became its president. Acting helped transform him. His confidence grew. He began to open up socially. In 1990, Victoria Breeden joined the same drama society as an 18-year-old freshman. As the society's leader, Rob often interacted with her. He was instantly drawn to her. They began dating, and within 2 weeks, Victoria was practically living in Rob's dorm room. Her behavior soon struck other students as unusual. She insisted on spending every moment with Rob, even when it disrupted his studies. Deeply in love, Rob didn't see the red flags. Having little experience with women, he assumed this kind of intense closeness was normal. Still, even he couldn't ignore how obsessively attached Victoria had become. By then, Rob was 20 and Victoria 19. She gradually isolated him from everyone else, especially other women. Rob started to sense that something wasn't right. That summer, after finishing his exams, he insisted on breaking up, wanting to spend the holidays with his family without Victoria. Naturally, she resisted. She quickly found a way to manipulate him into resuming the relationship. Whenever Rob made plans to meet friends at a pub or go out, Victoria would call, claiming she felt unwell and might have endometriosis. She even underwent medical tests to prove it, though no diagnosis ever appeared in her records. Many of Rob's friends believed she was faking it to control him. Each time she complained about her health, Rob cancelled his plans and rushed to her side. After 3 years together, Rob had tried to end the relationship countless times, but never succeeded. Victoria was a skilled manipulator who always managed to reel him back in. They often broke up briefly. Rob even dated other women, but Victoria would always interfere, stalking and intimidating anyone new. One night in 2001, after yet another breakup, Rob met a new woman and invited her over. Just after they shut the door, someone began pounding on it furiously. It was Victoria. Even the neighbors recognized her by then. She claimed she had lost her keys and needed to stay the night. Rob, weary but kind-hearted, let her sleep in the spare room. The next morning, he woke up beside his new girlfriend to find Victoria lying on the floor next to them, staring at him. As soon as he opened his eyes, she started a fight. It was just one of many incidents showing how completely Victoria tried to dominate Rob's life. She refused to accept that he no longer wanted her. In May 2001, Rob graduated from university. Victoria continued stalking him, scaring off other women. Eventually, she wormed her way back into his life, and after both left the university town, they moved into a rented flat together. From that moment, life with Victoria became a waking nightmare. She spent nearly all day in bed, insisting she was seriously ill, a clear excuse to avoid working and keep Rob at her service. She isolated Rob from his friends and family. Everyone notices how badly she treats him. Victoria made him do almost everything for her, repaying him only with insults. Still, Rob believed she was truly sick and continued taking her to hospitals for tests. During one visit, a doctor quietly asked Rob whether his girlfriend really had any condition at all, noting that all her test results were normal. It was the same story at every hospital. After that conversations, Rob began to suspect that Victoria was faking her illness to manipulate him. But instead of facing the truth, he kept convincing himself she simply needed his care and understanding. Several more years passed. Victoria eventually completed her university degree, while Rob earned a master's in advertising. After graduating, they moved in with Rob's parents. It didn't take long for his family to notice that something was off. Victoria made little effort to communicate, instead creating invisible barriers that cut Rob and his parents off from each other. Her strange behavior was impossible to ignore. She spent most days lying in bed, while Rob acted as her full-time caretaker. Rod and Victoria lived there for several months before Rob tried, once again, to end the relationship. This time, Victoria went to extraordinary lengths to convince him they could fix things, but only if they lived on their own. Reluctantly, Rob agreed, and they soon moved into a place together in Milton Keynes. They married in April 2004, when Rob was 24 and Victoria 23. Their wedding was a small, quiet affair attended only by close family. But even at the ceremony, guests sensed something strange. There was no real joy between the bride and groom. After the wedding, they began their married life, living apart from his parents. From that moment, Victoria assumed total control over her husband's life. She criticized nearly everything he did. Her manipulation slowly eroded Rob's mental health. He began to suffer from insomnia, anxiety attacks, and long bouts of depression. Meanwhile, Victoria continued to complain about her supposed endometriosis, describing constant pain that, according to her, had plagued her for years. Eventually, she told Rob that a specialist had recommended an unusual solution. Having a baby, Rob wasn't keen on the idea, but Victoria knew how to persuade him. Before long, she became pregnant. In 2006, they welcomed a daughter. For the first time in 7 years, Rob had someone who truly gave his life meaning. He was working full-time at an advertising agency, proud of his achievements and focused on building a career. Everything seemed to be falling into place, except for Victoria. Her manipulative behavior only worsened. Whenever Rob was at work, she called constantly, claiming something was wrong with their child and demanding that he come home. Yet whenever he rushed back, he always found their daughter perfectly fine. By now, Victoria had completely isolated Rob from his friends and family. He kept his frustrations to himself, confiding to a few close acquaintances that he often felt trapped, that marrying Victoria had been the biggest mistake of his life. Shortly after their daughter's first birthday, Victoria announced she wanted another baby. She said it would be good for their daughter and might even strengthen their relationship. The conversation took place one day while they were driving. Without warning, Rob blurted out that he couldn't live like this anymore. After years of emotional torment, he told her he wanted a divorce and that he believed he could be a better father on his own. Victoria was stunned. She tried repeatedly to change his mind, but Rob stood firm. In April 2008, when their daughter was about 18 months old, he left the family home and contacted a divorce lawyer. After 4 years of marriage, it was finally over. Victoria remained in their house, while Rob rented a small flat, keeping his new address secret. For a time, he even stayed away from work, afraid Victoria might show up and try to win him back. Once free, Rob slowly rebuilt his life. He started dating again, made new friends, and reconnected with people from university. Victoria, meanwhile, didn't stay single for long. Barely a year after the divorce, she began dating a new man named Russell, who soon moved into the house she shared with Victoria and her daughter. She even forced the little girl to call him Daddy. Rob suspected that Victoria was doing it deliberately, just to hurt him. When their daughter was nearly 4 years old, Victoria called Rob in a panic. She claimed she was unwell and that their little girl had suddenly fallen seriously ill, needed to be rushed to the hospital. She insisted that the child was in critical condition. Terrified, Rob dropped everything and drove nearly 200 kilometers to get there. But when he arrived, he was stunned to find his daughter sleeping peacefully in a hospital bed. Doctors ran several tests and found absolutely nothing wrong with her. Victoria, however, continued to insist that her daughter was suffering from a variety of ailments: constipation, allergies, fever, you name it. Rob visited the hospital every day, increasingly confused. One afternoon, his daughter told him something that deeply unsettled him. Every night, her mother put a hot water bottle in her bed and closed all the windows. Even though it was the middle of summer, it suddenly clicked for Rob. Victoria might be faking or even inducing her daughter's illness. The thought horrified him. Months later, Victoria and Russell showed up at Rob's house, demanding that he return some of their daughter's clothes that had been left behind during a recent visit. Rob calmly told her that the clothes were in the wash and he'd drop them off later. That's when Victoria suddenly turned hostile. She began shouting insults, tried to push her way inside. When Rob blocked the doorway, she deliberately fell backward, screamed that he had attacked her. Russell had witnessed the entire exchange, and even he seemed confused. Victoria immediately called the police, but after officers arrived and listened to both sides, they concluded that Rob hadn't done anything wrong. He had merely stopped his ex-wife from forcing her way into his home. The police refused to take further action. Victoria was furious. And from that moment, Rob could tell she wasn't finished with him yet. A few months later, Victoria suddenly refused to let Rob see their daughter again, claiming that the child had become gravely ill once more. She even said she couldn't obtain one of the girl's prescribed medications. Suspicious. Rob checked the details and discovered that the drug in question wasn't suitable for children at all. That's when everything fell into place. He managed to review parts of his daughter's medical records, and there, among the doctor's notes, he saw a reference to possible Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone else, usually to gain attention or sympathy. Rob was shaken. He realized that his daughter wasn't sick. Victoria was making her sick. Over time, Rob noticed a disturbing pattern. Whenever his daughter stayed with him, she was perfectly healthy, but as soon as she went back to her mother, strange, unexplainable symptoms returned. Rob began to suspect that Victoria was deliberately harming their child just to manipulate him or force him to come running back. In early 2011, Victoria gave birth to another child, this time with her new partner, Russell. Around the same period, Rob met a woman named Jane through mutual friends, and later that year, the two married. But what should have been a peaceful new beginning quickly turned into something far darker. Soon after the wedding, Rob began receiving disturbing late-night phone calls from an unknown number. No one spoke on the other end, only the sound of heavy, deliberate breathing. At first, he dismissed it as a cruel prank. But as the calls grew more frequent and persistent, fear set in. Convinced that someone was watching him, Rob went to the police to report that he was being stalked. Detectives traced the anonymous calls and discovered they were all coming from burner phones, prepaid devices, and SIM cards purchased without registration. Several of the numbers were eventually linked to real individuals, but when investigators contacted them, the responses were baffling. Each of these people claimed they had been trying to buy illegal substances from a man named Rob Parks. Police immediately launched an investigation, but Rob had never been involved in criminal activity, let alone illegal substances. He was a clean-cut professional with no record and a deep aversion to anything illegal. When questioned, Rob was stunned. He denied everything and insisted that someone was trying to frame him. Detectives soon confirmed his story. There was no evidence connecting him to illegal substances, distribution of any kind. Still, the situation left him deeply shaken. Rob couldn't shake the feeling that only one person could be behind this: his ex-wife, Victoria Breeden. But without proof, there was little anyone could do. Then, just as abruptly as they had begun, the calls and messages stopped. Victoria, however, didn't stop meddling in Rob's life. She continued to make co-parenting nearly impossible, blocking his attempts to spend time with their daughter. When the girl turned 6, Rob planned a special trip to Disneyland, but Victoria flatly refused to give permission. Not long after, Victoria broke up with Russell and started dating a new man named Wayne Wood, a soldier in the British Army. She proudly announced she would follow him wherever he was stationed, even to Germany, where he was soon to be deployed. She intended to take both her children with her. Rob, fearing he would lose all contact with his daughter, fought back. The custody battle began. During this tense period, a shocking incident occurred. Wayne suddenly appeared at Rob's home, shouting accusations at him, claiming that Rob had abused his own daughter. Rob was horrified. The allegations were unimaginable. He immediately realized Victoria was behind this. She had told Wayne outrageous lies, manipulating him, just as she had done to everyone else in her life. Rob denied everything, and the confrontation eventually fizzled out, but the damage was done. Victoria's obsession with destroying him was escalating. Soon after, the harassment took on a new form. Rob began receiving anonymous messages from unknown numbers, calling him a child abuser and threatening violence. The messages were traced and documented. Again, Rob was certain it was Victoria, but police couldn't gather sufficient evidence to link them to her. Victoria then crossed an unthinkable line. In a calculated move to accuse Rob of child abuse, she coached their daughter to tell classmates that her father had hurt and molested her. When the story reached teachers, Child Protective Services launched an investigation, but during their first interview, the truth came out. The little girl had been coerced by her mother into lying. The case was quickly closed, and no charges were filed against Rob, yet, unbelievably, Victoria faced no punishment for the false accusation. As the custody hearing approached, Rob could only hope it would finally end her campaign of harassment. Eventually, the court ruled in his favor. Victoria was forbidden from taking their daughter out of the country. Furious at the verdict, Victoria handed the child over to Rob and his wife Jane, then cut off nearly all contact with her. But rather than moving on, she began plotting something even darker. In October 2013, Rob received another chilling anonymous message, this time a death threat. The sender warned they would burn his house down. After years of psychological abuse, Rob had grown almost numb to the harassment. He chose not to report it. Then, on New Year's Eve 2013, police unexpectedly showed up at his home. They told Rob that an emergency call had been made, reporting a fire at his address. Everything seemed fine, and Rob explained his long history of stalking, harassment by his ex-wife. Officers took his statement seriously and promised to trace the source of the fake call, but before they could, the threats became real. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, Rob was jolted awake by the deafening sound of the fire alarm. Looking out the window, he saw his Audi engulfed in flames. He immediately shouted for his wife and daughter to run out the back door. Seconds later, a massive explosion shook the entire house. As the fire crew rushed to the scene, Rob's phone buzzed again. Another message, once more accusing him of child abuse and promising death. Fortunately, the blaze was contained before it reached the house, but the family was left deeply traumatized. It took his daughter nearly 6 months to recover from the terror of that night. Naturally, police opened an investigation into the car fire and explosion. In 2014, Victoria moved to Germany with Wayne. Their daughter stayed in England with Rob and his new wife, Jane. For a while, Rob allowed himself to hope that distance would stop the harassment. He underestimated Victoria not long after. Officers informed Rob that Victoria and Wayne had been stopped trying to smuggle firearms back into the UK from Germany. Months later, investigators concluded Wayne had been behind the false arson report. He was charged with making a false statement and with setting Rob's car alight. Victoria was summoned back to the UK for questioning, and police searched the house the pair had previously occupied, but came away without evidence tying her to the hoax call, so she initially avoided prosecution. Wayne, however, was convicted for the arson-related offenses and later sentenced to 7 years in prison. Shortly after his conviction, Victoria filed for divorce. By late 2018, it had been roughly 10 years since Rob and Victoria separated. Their daughter was 12. Rob was 38. He had tried hard to move on, but Victoria refused to let him. Then a man named Graham Wall messaged Rob, claiming to know Victoria, warning that she was dangerous. Rob didn't know Graham, assumed it was another trap. He ignored the message, and nearly a year passed. Then detectives contacted Rob again, saying a new threat had emerged. He agreed to meet them. To his surprise, they arrived with a local TV journalist and said his family would be featured in a documentary. Detectives told him they suspected his ex-wife had tried to hire someone to kill him. Graham turned out not to be some random stranger, but Victoria's newest boyfriend, a man she'd met on a dating site. They'd been together only a few weeks when she tearfully told him their daughter was living in appalling conditions and begged him to help rescue the child. Shockingly, she quickly urged Graham to kill Rob or find someone who would. Graham, appalled, suggested they contact Child Protective Services or pursue custody through the courts instead. Victoria dismissed him and called his objections a bad joke. Still uneasy, Graham planted a small recording device in the couple's flat, what he expected to capture, evidence of infidelity, turned out to be far worse. On tape, Victoria met with a man and discussed murdering her ex-husband. The recording captured detailed talk of setting Rob's car on fire to lure him outside and then bludgeoning him with a brick. On October 8, 2019, Graham took the recording to police. An attempted murder investigation was opened immediately. Victoria, far from panicking, presented herself at the police station the next day and claimed her personal belongings had been stolen, including the phone Graham had allegedly given to detectives. She tried to turn the story around, accusing Graham of framing her, even suggesting he had plotted the murder himself. A closer review of the audio, however, made the situation unmistakable. Victoria had been speaking with a man named Earl Gurnan, an individual known to police for a criminal past and willing to arrange violent acts for money. The tape showed she had been shopping for a hitman. She repeatedly rehearsed lurid, fabricated allegations about Rob and described in cold detail how she wanted him caught, bound, led into the woods and killed. By the time police briefed Rob, Victoria was already under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Earl was also brought to the station. He claimed their relationship had been casual and that he had not taken Victoria's requests seriously, even though, with his help, she had identified at least 3 potential killers. The trial began in early 2020, drawing the attention of many men whom Rob had never even met before. Each of them took the stand to testify that Victoria had approached them, trying to hire them as hitmen to kill her ex-husband. To justify her actions, she told them that Rob was a child abuser and claimed she only wanted to save her daughter from him. Investigators later discovered that Victoria had been searching for someone to carry out the murder as far back as 2014, offering different sums of money, up to 5,000 British pounds, to anyone willing to do it. Before the trial, Victoria was examined by several psychiatrists. Surprisingly, all of them agreed that she was completely sane and fully aware of her actions. Ultimately, she was found guilty on 3 counts of soliciting to commit murder. The court sentenced her to 9 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving roughly half her term. This means that Victoria Breeden could appear before the parole board for the first time by the end of 2025. In the aftermath, Rob spoke openly to journalists, expressing his frustration that Victoria would remain part of his life for years to come. He feared that once released, she might try to contact their daughter again. In Norway's quiet political circles, few couples appeared more stable or respectable than diplomat Per Paust and his wife, Anne Orderud Paust, a high-ranking government official with access to the nation's most sensitive institutions. They were polished, influential, and widely trusted, but behind the calm facade of their professional lives, a threat was quietly closing in. When Anne returned to her family farm seeking refuge after her husband's sudden death, tragedy struck again. In a single night, 3 members of the Orderud family were executed in their sleep, and what looked at first like the work of a professional assassin would soon unravel into one of the most disturbing, tangled, and controversial criminal cases in Norway's modern history. Per Paust was born on December 1, 1943, in Norway. Always eloquent and quick-witted, It was no surprise that he pursued political science at university after completing high school. He later became a Norwegian diplomat, serving as press secretary for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and holding several other senior positions throughout his career. He was married to Anne Orderud Paust, born on April 3, 1952, who was also a well-known public figure in Norway and served as private secretary to the Minister of Defense. The couple lived a respected, successful life in Oslo, surrounded by political influence and responsibility. Around 3:30 a.m. on March 12, 1998, colleagues drove the couple home after an evening out. They had barely stepped out of the car when a stranger suddenly attacked Per. He grabbed Per by the tie, threw him to the ground, and began kicking him repeatedly. Anne rushed to help her husband, striking the assailant several times with her purse, but this only provoked him further. He turned on Anne and hit her hard across the head. She screamed for help. Several witnesses noticed the commotion. The friends who had driven them home saw the attack in their rearview mirror and returned to intervene. At that moment, the attacker abruptly stood up, turned around, and slowly walked away, as if nothing had happened. He walked a short distance, then calmly circled back toward Per and Anne. But instead of attacking again, he merely walked past them, expressionless, before disappearing into the darkness. The entire encounter was strange and unsettling. When police arrived, multiple witnesses gave statements describing what they had seen. Despite their efforts, the attacker was never identified. His face had been concealed by the darkness. Investigators initially suspected robbery or retaliation linked to political disagreements. In time, Per and Anne recovered physically, but emotionally, they were forced to accept that the investigation had reached a dead end. About a year later, the attack had largely faded from public memory. On July 17, 1998, as the couple prepared to leave for work, Per got into his wife's car. As Anne approached from behind, she noticed something unusual beneath the rear wheel. She pulled out a black cylindrical tube, unsure of what it was, and brought it with her. Upon arriving at work with her husband, she immediately showed the item to a security guard. Although he was uncertain, he suspected it might be an explosive device. He urged them to contact the police, advice that proved critical. The bomb squad examined the object and confirmed it was a 500-gram stick of dynamite. Someone had affixed the explosive to their car. Anne and Per had no known personal conflicts, no apparent enemies who would want them dead. Detectives quickly suspected a connection to their professional roles, and a full investigation began. Police soon located a witness, the couple's neighbor. That morning, he had noticed a thin wire stretched across the street near the observation deck of the building where the couple lived. He hadn't thought much about it at the time, but it was now clear the wire had been a Bickford fuse designed to ignite the explosive. Believing it to be litter, he had picked it up and thrown it away. That seemingly insignificant action had unknowingly saved the couple's lives. Investigators recovered the discarded fuse along with the explosive for analysis, but neither yielded any useful leads. While the police were still investigating the bomb, another frightening and inexplicable incident occurred on August 12, 1998. Late that night, Per woke up to use the bathroom. As soon as he sat up, he noticed an overwhelming smell of gas and gasoline. When he approached the front door, the odor grew stronger. He opened it and saw a large metal cylinder outside, its valve open and hissing. A tube ran from the cylinder directly into their apartment. Per immediately contacted the police. When officers arrived, the 5-liter gas cylinder was still standing outside the apartment door. Almost all of the gas had already escaped. The cylinder was soaked in gasoline, and a clear trail of it led all the way down to the street. It was obvious the device had been deliberately set up to flood their apartment with gas for reasons that remain unknown. The attacker failed to ignite the gasoline and trigger an explosion, likely because Per had woken up, frightened him off. When police and firefighters entered the building, the air inside the apartment was so saturated with gas that even the smallest spark could have caused a catastrophic blast. Residents had to be evacuated immediately. Per and Anne were deeply shaken. They understood that someone wanted them dead. They were forced to stay with friends, while detectives and fire officials continued their investigation. The series of attempted attacks drew massive media attention, especially because the victims were high-profile government officials and the attempts appeared increasingly coordinated. Unfortunately, the case stalled. No fingerprints or traces were found on the cylinder, and once again, the perpetrator had managed to escape without leaving a single useful clue. Despite extensive police work, the investigation reached another dead end. While the case remained unsolved, Anne and Per received an offer to work in New York as consular officials. Both accepted enthusiastically and temporarily moved to the United States, hoping distance would shield them from the unknown threat looming over their lives in Norway. They considered the opportunity a much-needed escape. Living and working in Oslo had become far too dangerous. In January 1999, Anne and Per felt the situation had calmed and decided to return home. But any hope of a peaceful life in Norway quickly faded. Shortly after their return, Per was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. Only a few months later, on May 6, 1999, he passed away. Grieving and emotionally exhausted, Anne was devastated. She did not want to abandon her professional responsibilities, but she needed time, rest, and the support of her family. She decided to stay at her parents' farm in Surum while she recovered, because the identity of the person who had targeted her and her husband was still unknown. She kept her plans secret, sharing them only with her closest family members. Anne's father, Christian Orderud, was 81 years old, and her mother, Marie Orderud, was 84. They lived on the Orderud family farm, a large property with several houses. Anne's brother, also named Per, lived in the main farmhouse, while their elderly parents lived in a smaller two-story house nearby. Anne planned to stay with them for a while as she tried to regain her strength. On May 23, 1999, Hans, Anne's uncle and Christian's brother, drove out to the farm to visit the family. The funeral for Anne's husband had taken place only a few days earlier. Hans wanted to offer his condolences and support. When he arrived, he walked up to the smaller house and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. It was a warm, sunny day, so he assumed they might have gone for a walk in the woods behind the home. But something felt off, so he circled to the back of the house to check. There, on the terrace, he noticed broken glass scattered near the rear entrance. Looking up, he saw the second-floor balcony door shattered. Alarmed, Hans entered the house. The door was unlocked. Inside, he found a horrific scene. 47-year-old Anne lay lifeless on the kitchen floor. In the living room, 84-year-old Marie had also been killed. In the bedroom, 81-year-old Christian was found dead as well. Hans immediately called the police. A triple murder investigation began at once. By the end of the day, detectives had reconstructed the basic outline of what had happened. Sometime between midnight and 5 a.m., unknown assailants had climbed up to the second-floor terrace, smashed the glass door, and entered the house. All three victims were in their pajamas. Investigators concluded that more than one perpetrator had carried out the killings because the victims were shot with two different calibers, .22 and .38. The attackers first entered the bedroom where Marie and Christian Orderud were sleeping. Christian was shot first with a .38 caliber round. Although seriously wounded, He did not die immediately. In a desperate attempt to protect his wife, he managed to reach for a shotgun, stored in the wardrobe, but before he could use it, he was struck again by a .22 caliber bullet. He collapsed and died moments later. Marie also attempted to defend herself, but she was shot in the chest with a .38 caliber pistol. She did not die instantly. She tried to flee toward the living room, likely hoping to alert her daughter. There, she was shot again, severely wounded. She collapsed onto the floor. Still alive, but rapidly losing blood, she slipped into unconsciousness and died within minutes. Anne, who likely woke to the sound of gunfire and screams, ran into the kitchen. She was immediately shot with a .38 caliber round. The injury was fatal, and she collapsed near the kitchen counter, dying instantly. Beyond these findings, investigators had very little to work with. The perpetrators left almost no physical evidence inside the house. Spent shells were recovered from both calibers, and a partial shoe print was found among the broken glass near the smashed door on the second-floor balcony. After processing the crime scene, forensic specialists expanded the search to the surrounding farmland. In the nearby woods, they discovered a heavily worn, yellow woolen sock. It appeared the killers had attempted to cover their shoes with knitted socks to avoid leaving identifiable prints. The thin heels of the socks tore quickly during movement. Part of one heel had detached and fallen off along the path. Since there were no other solid leads besides the shoe print, investigators began searching for shoes matching the pattern. They eventually located a store in the region that had sold 2 identical pairs in the relevant size. Unfortunately, the shopkeeper could not identify the buyer. At the same time, police began looking for possible witnesses. Their first priority was to question Per Christian Orderud and his wife, Veronica Orderud, who lived in the main farmhouse on the same property. Investigators believed they might have heard or seen something. Both appeared terrified. Per, especially, was visibly shaken by the brutal deaths of his parents and sister. The couple insisted they had no idea who could have done such a thing. The series of earlier attacks targeting Anne and her husband had deeply unsettled them as well. Per and Veronica provided little useful information. They claimed to have heard nothing that night. To investigators, this raised further questions. But considering the earlier use of explosives and gas, along with the likely use of silencers during the shooting, the attackers seemed meticulous and highly prepared. This would explain why the murders produced so little noise. The theory of a robbery gone wrong was dismissed almost immediately. Nothing had been stolen. The previous assassination attempts against Anne and Per also eliminated the possibility of coincidence. This was clearly a targeted attack driven by a personal motive. With that realization, the list of potential suspects narrowed significantly. The killers seemed familiar with the family's routines and circumstances. Very few people knew that Anne had quietly moved back to the farm after her husband's death. It was also likely not a coincidence that the attack occurred only days after she voluntarily withdrew her police protection. The lack of signs of a struggle suggests the victims didn't feel threatened by their attackers at first, indicating they likely knew each other. About 10 days after the triple murder, a witness contacted the police and reported that Veronica's sister, Kristin Kirkemo, had been acting unusually suspicious. According to the witness, Kristin frequently practiced shooting in a wooded area near her home. The claim raised immediate red flags. She was brought in for questioning. Her behavior at the police station only deepened the investigators' suspicions. She avoided direct answers, spoke vaguely, and seemed nervous. Police obtained a warrant to search her home. Kristin lived not far from the Orderud farm with her boyfriend, Lars Grönerud. Both had a history of banned substances use and long-term dependency issues. Inside the house, police found a substantial quantity of explosives, tools commonly used to manufacture explosive devices and several firearms, including a .22 caliber weapon. Because one of the calibers used in the murders was .22, the firearm was immediately sent for ballistic testing. The results, however, did not match the weapon to the killings. Yet, the ammunition seized from their home matched the type of cartridges found at the crime scene, giving detectives reason to believe they were still following the right trail. Kristen's boyfriend, Lars, was also questioned. He confirmed owning a .38 caliber weapon, while Kristen had used the .22 caliber one during shooting practice. They claimed they were simply hunting enthusiasts who enjoyed target shooting. Despite these suspicious coincidences, investigators initially focused more attention on Anne Orderud Paust and her brother, Per Christian Orderud. Anne and Per Christian Orderud had been close since childhood. Both grew up on the Orderud family's land, but their lives diverged as adults and chose a different path. She attended university, completed her education, and entered political service. Her parents continued managing the family farm, but as Christian grew older, his health declined. He struggled to maintain the demanding workload. Around the time Per turned 30, Christian and Marie retired from active farm work and handed over management to Per Christian Orderud. Anne still had no interest in farm life, but retained her legal share of the inheritance. Nearly a decade later, when Per was about 40, a 21-year-old veterinary assistant named Veronica began working on the property. Despite the significant age difference, she and Per quickly became romantically involved, after which she moved into the main house. Tensions surfaced in 1997. Christian objected strongly to Veronica living in the primary residence. Around the same time, the farm's accountant discovered that Per had registered himself as the owner, even though he had never completed the agreed-upon payment to his father. Christian was furious and considered hiring a lawyer to renegotiate the terms, insisting his son had failed to honor their original contract. When Per learned of his father's intentions, he retaliated by filing a legal complaint. The conflict escalated dramatically. Father and son stopped speaking for an entire year. Instead of seeking reconciliation, Per sued his father, arguing that the written agreement proving the sale price was legally binding. He initially won the case, but Christian countered by filing an appeal, claiming his signature had been forged. The appellate court accepted his argument. The earlier ruling was overturned. Detectives noted that as the daughter, Anne would be the primary heir to the family farm if her parents died. Christian had reportedly been dissatisfied with Per's management of the farm and concerned about the loans Per had taken out, fearing they might jeopardize the estate's long-term financial stability. With these family conflicts now exposed, Per and Veronica quickly became prime suspects, but they weren't alone. Once investigators discovered that Kristen and Lars owned firearms compatible with those used in the killings, they too were added to the list. Per and Veronica denied owning any guns and insisted they were not involved. They claimed that on the night of the murders, they were asleep in the main farmhouse, had heard nothing unusual, but their alibi was weak. No one else could verify it. Moreover, given the close distance between the houses, their claim that they heard nothing raised serious doubts. Even with silencers, the breaking of glass, the forced entry, and the victim's screams should have been audible, especially in the quiet countryside at night. Their silence only intensified investigators' suspicion. All four suspects attended the funeral, but even cried, drawing attention from those present. Gradually, under increasing pressure from investigators, Kristin Kirkemo and Lars Grønnerød began to crack. They admitted that they had supplied Veronica and Per with the weapons and had helped plan the triple murder. Lars was noticeably less cooperative. He confirmed that he had given a weapon to Kristen, but insisted that he knew nothing about their intentions. He claimed he had been at home on the night of the murders, and his alibi was verified. However, he could not confirm Kristin's whereabouts. At first, Kristin was released due to a lack of solid evidence linking her directly to the killings. She denied participating in the shootings at the farm. Soon after, she returned to the police station and presented an alibi, claiming that she and a friend had spent the night delivering packages around the city. She even provided mobile phone records as proof. Digital analysis seemed to support her account. But when detectives questioned the friend, the truth quickly unraveled. The friend admitted she had not been with Kristin that night. Kristin had simply borrowed her phone and passed the activity off as her own. Once this lie was exposed, the police had enough grounds to arrest the entire group. All four suspects, Veronica, Kristin, and Lars, were charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and accessory to murder. 6 months passed as the investigation continued, with the primary objective of locating the firearm used in the triple homicide. During this time, the suspects remained in custody, but they suddenly recanted their earlier statements and sought release. Each suspect gave conflicting confessions throughout the interrogations. Per alone was questioned at least 17 times, and although his story shifted slightly each time, he appeared more consistent than the others. The suspects lied repeatedly, but they had coordinated their stories beforehand, so their versions overlapped in convenient ways. The murder weapon still had not been found. When Lars admitted he had sold one of the firearms, he offered almost no details about the buyer, claiming he didn't know the person. It was too little information to trace the weapon. However, he did provide one crucial piece of information. He said that Kristin had practiced shooting with that gun. He even showed detectives the exact place where she used to hang targets from a tree. At the scene, police recovered .38 caliber shell casings and several bullets embedded in the tree trunk. Ballistic analysis confirmed that these bullets were identical to those removed from the victims' bodies. This allowed investigators to link the weapon to the suspects, even without ever recovering the gun itself. However, this alone could not determine who had pulled the trigger on the night of the murders. The media covered the high-profile case relentlessly, sparking a flood of theories, one of the most popular being that the murders were connected to organized crime. Many believed that Anne Orderud Paust was the primary target because of her political role. Earlier assassination attempts on her and her husband seemed to support the theory, and her parents may have been killed simply for being witnesses. The constant media attention also triggered a wave of false reports from citizens seeking publicity, yet some tips had elements of truth. During the investigation, a woman working at a senator's office contacted police, stating that on May 15th, an anonymous caller had warned her that an attack was being planned on Anne. That same day, her colleague also contacted authorities about the call. Investigators attempted to trace it but failed. When this information became public, many became even more convinced that the murders were politically motivated. After all, how could the police fail to protect a high-profile government official who had already survived multiple attacks? Investigators also examined whether the suspects had been involved in the previous assassination attempts targeting Anne and her husband. They soon discovered that the explosives found in Lars and Kristin's home were identical to the dynamite planted under Anne's car the previous year. All of the materials, dynamite, Bickford fuses, and black tubes, had been obtained by Lars. The question of motive came up again and again throughout the investigation. While per Christian Orderud's motive was considered strong, centered on inheritance, ownership of the farm, and financial gain, the involvement of Veronica Orderud, Kristin Kirkemo, Lars Grenerud was more difficult to understand. Although all three might have been tempted by money, investigators found no significant transfers, withdrawals, or bank movements that suggested a direct financial reward. Eventually, however, another picture began to form. After gaining full ownership of the Orderud farm, Per and Veronica planned to divide the large property into smaller plots, which they intended to sell individually to developers and private buyers. Veronica later admitted that Per had attracted her with promises of wealth, but neither Per nor Veronica possessed the experience or the weapons needed to carry out such a crime. That was when Veronica approached her sister Kristin and Kristin's boyfriend, Lars. She knew about their addiction issues and believed they would not refuse an offer that involved easy money. This suspicion was later confirmed when detectives found Veronica's diary, which contained harsh remarks about Christian and Marie. In it, she described Per's legal battles with his father and repeatedly expressed her wish that the elderly couple would disappear. Another motive soon emerged, one tied not to property or wealth, but to family. Kristin had given birth to a son several years earlier, but due to her banned substances use, she lost custody. Her sister Veronica quickly secured guardianship of the boy. As the official guardian, Veronica had strict responsibilities and could not allow Kristin unsupervised access. Kristin was only able to see her child when she visited the Orderud farm, but Anne's plan to sell her share of the farm threatened to unravel everything. It put both the family home and Per's expected profit at risk. For Kristin, it also threatened her only opportunity to see her son. Fearing that she would lose even this limited access, Kristin became deeply involved in the conspiracy and dragged Lars into it as well. When these elements finally came to light, the case moved rapidly towards sentencing. On June 22, 2001, Veronica Orderud and Kristin Kokemo were found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 21 years in prison. The maximum penalty in Norway, Lars Grønnerud, was convicted of illegal possession of a firearm and given 2.5 years, though prosecutors appealed, and his sentence was later increased to 18 years. During the appeals process, Kristin's sentence was reduced to 16 years, largely because the court could not determine conclusively who fired the fatal shots and who served primarily as accomplices in planning the murders. All 4 defendants have since completed their sentences and been released. Veronica was granted parole after serving 2/3 of her term. More than 14 years later, she continues to deny any involvement, giving occasional interviews in which she maintains her innocence. Although she divorced Per long ago, she still keeps in contact with him and visits the graves of the murdered Orderud family. Despite the convictions, some people remain unconvinced of their guilt. To many, the alleged motive, property disputes, inheritance, and family tension seem too convoluted to justify the killing of an entire household. Others argued that the earlier assassination attempts on Anne Orderud Paust and her husband pointed to a more powerful enemy. Some continued to believe that the murders were orchestrated by organized crime. Private investigator Tor Sandberg publicly suggested in 2009 that the Balkan Mafia may have been involved, citing the unusually rapid death of Anne's husband, which he believed resembled poisoning more than cancer. However, Norwegian police have consistently rejected these theories, continuing to insist that Per, Veronica, Kristin, and Lars were responsible for the murders.